Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news. Today is Friday, March 27th, 2026. I'm starting later today because I made an appointment forgetting that I actually was going to stream today. So yeah, stupid act on my part there. So apologies for that. Although later streams might actually just be the better time. It's just been my experience that if I start streaming late in the evening, then that just pushes me to stay awake even longer in the middle of the night. Which yeah, and then I don't get anything else done usually for the rest of the day anyways when I stream. Let's look at the SteamDB 24-hour peak concurrent chart here real quick, and then we'll do a little bit of warm-up, but probably not that much, and then we'll jump into the video game news. There isn't really too much to talk about. My network ad blocker is down at the moment, so we're gonna have some weirdness there. Yeah, couple of devices I have actually just don't power back up at all after the power has been out for a decent amount of time, so there's room for improvement on that overall. Let's see, have I been doing anything else? No, because yeah, still just working on cleaning and decluttering and paperwork, and that's just going to take forever, and that's very boring to talk about, so I'm not gonna get into huge amounts of details there, that for that reason, and for just privacy reasons. I am still watching Supernatural season 4. I'd say probably about the halfway point through season 4 there starts to be a lot more willingness to show skin. They clearly got a note from somebody at the CW to sex it up. It's still broadcast over their television, so they never filmed, or if they did film any actual nipples or boobs showing, that they probably aren't on the DVDs or anything like that either. So yeah, it's just see a maybe side boob, maybe a back, but there is actual kissing and such going on now a lot more. Also, they did another flashback episode, which seems just kind of crazy to do flashback episodes. That definitely would be something I would leave on the cutting room floor to make an abridged Supernatural series, is to having kids act like younger Sam and Dean. Just doesn't make any sense. You very quickly, after the introduction of Castiel, find out that the angels are not really what you'd want them to be, and they are just one side of a war being fought. And most of season 4 is still Lilith in the background, with the rising of the apocalypse. If 66 out of 666 seals are broken, of course it is talked about, the idea, but it's a pretty poorly implemented concept in that you're just not seeing Lilith actually do anything, and you're not seeing the angels or Sam and Dean actually stopping any of the seals. And even if they did stop some of the seals from breaking, it kind of doesn't matter when you only need 10% of them to be broken. And what's funny is my fuzzy memories about how Lucifer eventually does get freed from hell doesn't, I think, really have anything to do with 66 seals of the apocalypse being broken. or not at all. And honestly, I don't think that happens until maybe a season or two later, and has nothing to do with Lilith. They kind of go in a side quest. And then there's just like a lot of episodes that are, again, Monster of the Week episodes, not much of anything happening. It is funny when you have one of the longest running series. I don't think Supernatural is the longest running series. I think MASH and Little House on the Prairie still are shows that have had more episodes. Of course, those shows were from a older time where a show getting canceled would have just not made sense. So they were allowed to just keep going. MASH, ironically, went, I believe, 2 years longer than the Vietnam War, I believe is what they're showing. Yep. So it actually ran for longer than the real time, chronological time that the Vietnam War happened. But yeah, certainly for a rewatch, for an abridged version of Supernatural, it does just kind of feel like all of the Monster of the Week episodes are fairly skippable because they're not really going to introduce any new characters this season, which is funny because the previous season it definitely felt like they were doing the exact opposite of that. And so again, maybe there was a different thought or note being put there. But yeah, what's funny is halfway through season 4 you've already seen the coming and going of the Roadhouse, which clearly if you're going to rewrite it, you would have never introduced the Roadhouse as a concept and all the characters in the Roadhouse, and you would have just had Bobby be the equivalent to what the Roadhouse provided to the story, because that's totally what he is doing now. This is, I guess, season 4 is when Bobby really becomes a primary, secondary character, and you do see him stay around for most of the rest of the series. I think the actor himself probably got pretty old and may have actually died, even. I'm pretty sure the character died off in one of the very late seasons, season 13, 14, 15. You do see with the more romantic liaisons being talked about and mentioned for Sam and Dean, you start to see them grow up a little bit. They're still growing up childish as characters, and still, yeah, very immature and childish, which makes a lot of sense considering how they were poorly raised. But with the growing conflicts between Sam and Dean, they stop being just these college-aged characters that they were being written as, and they start to be more mature in their life. I would say 32, 35-year-olds. What is that saying? That scientifically the human brain is not fully formed until they're 32 years old. So effectively, that should be like when adults are considered adults. But yeah, it does feel like the relationship is maturing a little bit more. Unfortunately, it is very much the seeds of some of the worst parts of Supernatural, in my opinion, when Sam and Dean are fighting with each other, and particularly in season 3 and season 4, they are fighting with each other kind of constantly, and it really isn't until maybe the 3rd act, maybe halfway through the 2nd act of seasons, where Sam and Dean are just locked in as characters and the conflict is never really going to be the two of them fighting as much as it is them just fighting the next force. And eventually you get into the later acts of Supernatural, and just it feels like, from what I remember, every episode at that point becomes a story episode, and there's no longer any filler episodes at all. Yeah. If it were a book series, I would think Supernatural would probably have issues. If each season was a novel, then the story would be completely focused on the main story, and then the standalone episodes would be like the fan fiction or the extended universe of Star Wars type novels, where here's Sam and Dean once again fighting a monster, but they're just fighting a monster and they're not going to affect the mainline story that is canonical of where it begins and where it ends. Which, yeah, you can't really say this without spoiling it, so I'm going to say spoiler for the ending of Supernatural, in case you actually care. But it probably would have been nicer if Sam and Dean had an opportunity for the show to end, but for there to still be more adventures, more fighting of monsters. And then that's where all the Monster of the Week stories really could have been told. Of course, that would be a weird TV show to say, well, the actual main story ended and wrapped up at this point, and we're just not going to put any more plot elements in the episodes after that. That these are just bonus episodes. It'd be an interesting experiment for a TV show. Like, if you did that with, like, Star Trek Next Generation, for instance, where it's just like, hey, we're going to squeeze in some extra episodes that will not really change anything, but we think people might appreciate. And these are just going to be extra side stories. I imagine there have been some anime TV shows or movies that have really done that. I imagine the Fate series has done that. I think they have. But yeah, for Western entertainment, that would be fairly new and revolutionary as a concept. But also may not be received particularly well. Effectively, that is what the Star Trek animated series was, is that it was the original Star Trek, but here's some more episodes, but we are animating it and we're not bringing back all the same actors and all the same people. But certainly with digital these days, we are really on the cusp of something like that happening, where you start to see shows just have episodes squished in the middle to pad out the runtime. And certainly with the Star Wars movies, some of those, Rogue 13 or Rogue One. Yeah, Rogue One is a great example of let's squeeze in a story in between the prequels and sequels, and yeah, I think that's where it's squeezed in. So yeah, it has been done on a rare occasion. But you'd almost want it done to a beloved, very short series, not a 15-season TV series like Supernatural. Although, if originally the Monster of the Week episodes were missing, it wouldn't be 15 seasons. It would be a much more reasonable 6 or 7 seasons, I would guess. And it certainly is interesting how CW had their one hit in Supernatural and just could not make any other hits last anywhere close to that length or have that level of popularity. It is worth mentioning that if a show like Babylon 5, though, tried to insert extra content, people would probably revolt on it, despite the fact that the Babylon 5 movies actually totally do that. but they were released by the same creator, and around the same time that the TV series was coming out. So they get a pass for that. Whereas if they were to try and add more episodes to Babylon 5, the original Babylon 5, right now, that'd be kind of crazy. Heck, it's crazy that they're making a Spaceballs 2, which they wrapped production on, I heard. But yeah, there's definitely been talks of doing something more with Babylon 5, whether it's yet another attempt at a sequel series or another continuation movie. But I think there is also perhaps a thought that they would do some kind of animated thing or new actor things. I really wonder if we're ever going to see new TV actors get very far, or whether TV itself is just going to be so dead and opportunities through Netflix are going to be so rare, and streaming services like Netflix are going to be so rare that there just aren't going to be enough TV style actors who can actually survive and make a career out of it. And yeah, the transition from a TV actor to be anything more of a success is very, very rare. Even the supernatural actors are not particularly transitioning into a lot of other work. Yeah. But yeah, I would be okay with a Babylon 5 animated remake of the series, but I would definitely assume that they were just going to be remaking almost all the episodes, and even in Babylon 5, I think there was over 5 seasons, 2 or 3 episodes that don't actually matter and connect to the overall story, whereas every other episode in Babylon 5 totally connects to the overall story. It is in at least 100 episodes and I believe 5 movies worth of a epic, the Odyssey style narration of a story, of a narrative. And it doesn't perhaps immediately feel like that, but from the pilot episode all the way to the final episode, that there are elements and hints and the overall arcing plot that's going on. Despite the fact that in Babylon 5 they also had to replace the main captain of Babylon 5 because the actor just didn't want to do it, and I think they probably got rid of a couple of other characters that would have played bigger roles, but it still kind of worked. And so maybe there is an interesting story to tell there if you could animate Babylon 5 and have the story be told as it was originally intended by, I believe the creator is J. Michael Straczynski, versus what he had to pivot to and change, although I don't think he really changed too much. If one actor was replaced with another, he just copy and pasted all the character traits and ideas onto the new actor. Which, yeah. And there is certainly a thing to point out that Babylon 5 was one of the very first TV shows to use a lot of CGI. Star Trek The Next Generation would have been before then, but they tended not to use that much CGI in Star Trek The Next Generation. So if you were going to come out with a animated, maybe hyper-realistic, maybe even AI generated version of remake of Babylon 5, if you put a lot of effort into it, if you put a lot of polish into it, all of which would not really be AI, there would be almost a honoring of how technology pushing the original Babylon 5 happens. But you would almost certainly get into an uncanny valley situation where the human actors, of which there are many in Babylon 5, would look very weird. I see Zig's on the chat saying, hey Zig. Let's see. And I don't think I really have done too much of anything else. Yeah, just all the paperwork. It's making me way more tired than you would probably believe as far as what's been draining me. I do find that when using my brain, that burns more calories than physical activity really does. But then again, I just don't really do too much of either if I can avoid it. This game is on the anniversary. I also saw on Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel that it's been running for 1500 days now, which 365 days a year, you're saying roughly 4 years and some change that it's been going. And I assume it's still just going to go as strong as it can. We did see that Shadowverse, the original Shadowverse that people actually liked, is being shut down. But the difference there, I think, is there's no new Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to replace Master Duel at the moment. In fact, I saw that there's even a refresh on Hearthstone, so they're trying to get people to jump back into Hearthstone and relearn the meta, because they've changed things up and probably added some new cards and gameplay mechanics and things like that to spice it up a little bit. I don't think I would go back to playing any card game, but yeah. Remember, in the case of Yu-Gi-Oh! The creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Died trying to save some people drowning a couple years back, so the entire series of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think is in kind of a mourning period and a stall period where it is questionable what the next step will be for Yu-Gi-Oh! If anything is the next step for Yu-Gi-Oh! They may just let it rest. I'd have to really think hard. Has there been any kind of manga or anime creator who has died, whose artwork in Japan has then been led to creating something else? I don't think there has. I think the Japanese take that pretty seriously, and when an artist dies, the art just ends where it ends, and that is that. Maybe I've heard of a couple of times where somebody comes in and wraps up a manga, but I don't think they do anything bigger with it. Of course, there is a big difference between something like Pokemon, which effectively is owned by the Pokemon Company, which is effectively in part owned by Nintendo, so that would just keep on going, and they wouldn't really attribute any one individual as creating Pokemon because of that. And Nintendo with Mario and Shigeru Miyamoto, still Nintendo will continue to make Mario games after Shigeru Miyamoto retires and or dies, and they've already started to put other people in charge of making Mario elements. But yeah, as far as Yu-Gi-Oh!, I assume Konami will still do something with it once they can figure out what they're going to do with it. That Konami will either just continuously remaster and re-release old Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, or push for some new twist. Yeah. Inherently, there is just a huge amount of limitation as far as collectible card games or trading card games, in that it's cardboard. And you can put maybe an NFC tag in it, and you could potentially even put a whole computer in each bit of cardboard, but it would make it too expensive, and it's not going to change too much, really. there's the biggest new invention I've heard of as far as cardboard games is the ability to print on clear plastic. That is just about the only thing I can think that would be slightly a bit of a game changer, because it then takes 2D pieces of art and potentially makes them 3D pieces of art. But I don't know what else you could really do with them. It'd be cool if there was some kind of like origami you could do with cards. So you get a card and then you fold it into a 3D model of something. I'm sure you could do that with paper cranes and things like that, but that would limit you down to only a few hundred origami concepts. I don't know if anybody knows how to make brand new origami things. You could put an NFC tag on them. I had an idea for a technology a few years back of bringing a full digital card game to the real world by having a system, which would probably have to be a system that in the United States in particular was just run by Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering to start with. But it would be fairly thin circuit boards with LCD screens on them and NFC tag readers on them, and you'd have like 5 in a set, and so you would wave the card over a point on the play mat, and that would be effectively you drawing a card and pulling out a card from a virtual deck. And so then the card in the LCD screen would change to that art. It could be e-ink. That would make it a lot more expensive, but then you wouldn't have to potentially have a powered mat transmitting power to each of the card things. That being said, you probably still would want a powered mat, so the mat itself would be a wireless energy source for each of these virtual cards. And even 5 cards is probably too few. So at the time, and I think even now, if you were going to create a system like this, it would almost have to be a subscription service, because the cost of the play sets, unless you're making them in huge bulk, would be $200 to $300. And yeah, a whole bunch of cards would have to be considered and played, and anything gambling, nobody's going to trust that at all. Although weirdly, there is some technology in casinos that are suspicious as far as how easy they are to potentially modify or hack. But yeah, there's definitely a way you could squeeze technology into card games, but I'm not sure they're really going to be welcome that way. And arguably, if you really wanted card games to become really popular, maybe you go the other direction. You figure out how to make cards that are way cheaper, but they don't like that idea. They certainly don't like the idea that we're going to print this basically on toilet paper, and it's going to be easy to tear and throw away and get a replacement if you want. For the most part, I think card games want to go digital, where they can get microtransaction money a lot more and a lot easier. Speaking of card games, Pokemon TCG Pocket is in the 6th spot, still playing that. And still playing Memento Mori. Honestly, I think I might have almost missed today's Memento Mori daily quest. Yeah, depending on how long this stream goes, I might miss it or forget about it. Right now, I still am in a weird situation where I'm waking up at about noon when I should be waking up a little bit earlier than that. don't really have anything to say about the hardware. We are on the verge of getting the next month's hardware survey. I don't think that's likely going to change too much. I did see in Linus Tech Tips, didn't watch all of it though, of potentially Intel trying to make a kind of new kind of chip, one that would have less of a boost feature in it, in that it is just going to run slower but consistently the same speed and not ever really run into as much hitches, but also not boost, which there is probably room for reevaluating whether the boost or overclock speeds you might get while gaming is something that is still really necessary. Because in an ideal world, you'd buy a gaming chip, it would have no built-in overclocking, which AMD makes it very easy in the BIOS to make it seem like it's not overclocking when it really is, and a lot of BIOSes turn that on by default, which then is crazy because then sometimes AMD won't replace a broken CPU if you overclocked it, so never admit to overclocking the chip. That being said, also the chips have fuses and chips built and logs built into them, so they know if they've been overclocked in many cases. Although by the time you actually send a chip back for replacement, they probably are not going to call you out on that, because it would be kind of crazy if you sent a several $100 chip to get RMA'd and they just mailed it back to you and said, no, this has been overclocked and we're not going to replace it. But I've heard stories where that's happened, certainly. But yeah, ideally, we would just hit a point where games ran and the CPU processor speed was the CPU processor speed at all times, and that it wasn't underclocking for power savings and it wasn't overclocking for performance reasons. That being said, I don't think we're really close to that happening, and yeah, it very possibly would never happen. Yeah, I haven't gotten back to Resident Evil 2. I may get some of that done in the next week, although it is very weird to potentially jump in and out of Resident Evil 2. Yeah, I talked to somebody who was playing Resident Evil Requiem, and it is kind of interesting, certainly, to hear them want to talk about that, and I'm just so far behind. Well, you can get the original Kerbal Space Program for $10, but you would be supporting a company that fired all the people who made Kerbal Space Programs, so I don't think I would buy that. There's a replacement one called Kitten Space Program, I believe, that people should probably keep an eye out for. Yeah. Some Dishonored games. I played the first Dishonored, haven't gotten around to playing any of the other Dishonored games, which is really the story of my life. And perhaps, in a weird way, maybe highlights the fact that no video game really locks me down. Well, very few video games. There's a few that lock me down and make me want to play the sequels right after playing the first one. Resident Evil isn't even, I think, an exception to that. I just think it kind of made sense to play Resident Evil 1 and then Resident Evil 0 and then Resident Evil 2 Remake. But it would equally make as much sense to stop after Resident Evil 2 Remake and make some other footage of some other game instead of going through all of them. Yeah. Let's see. There's new DLC out for Borderlands 4, and somehow that has brought it back into the top sellers list. Although in fairness, there was considerably less complaints about the story and the characters in Borderlands 4 than Borderlands 3. So I think it is maybe a case that people who are sticking with it would be willing to keep on playing it. It's not going to be as good as Borderlands 2, but it's fine. Seems to be that Crimson Desert, I heard, had a lot of control issues and things that just needed to be improved upon and patched on day one, and that explains the negative reviews on the first day that seemed to completely disappear amongst a deluge of positive reviews the next few days, which certainly it is interesting that people could make changes so fast. I also heard somebody speculating, and I would assume this is just speculation, that the game, what was it, Crimson Desert, is supposed to actually be a proper MMO, and that it feels like to that person that was speculating a MMO, which, yeah, I suppose that might make some sense, that if the MMO aspects just didn't work. VR video cacher is a tool used to cache VR chat / resonant videos to your local disk and or for fix YouTube videos from failing to load. I suspect this may not be too much of anything, but it looks like it's a application that is free and is doing what it claims to do. I don't think these color bars as a test chat are, as a test video, are particularly too useful. You'd still use them, certainly, but a better pattern with HDR colors probably should be the new standard, and the way to use these test bars in particular require way more knowledge than what you would think to use them to their full intended purpose. It's not just that you bring up the test bars and you look at them with your eyes. Yes, you do some of that, but you also have to adjust settings and know what settings you should adjust with those test bars and what settings you shouldn't. Some of the test patterns require you to have like a red filter glass or a blue filter glasses on to properly adjust things. Which, yeah, it probably would make a lot of sense if these test patterns had instructions written on them to remind people what to do. Of course, if they make it too easy, maybe some video editors would be out of a job. The Cube Save Us is still mostly negative. I don't see any Steam Decks available for sale. I mentioned in the last stream that they were going to make, there was a news story about they were going to make less Nintendo Switch 2s because demand is low. Well, now there has been a confirmation announcement that Sony is going to be raising all of its hardware prices too. So console gaming is doing very poorly. I wouldn't be surprised by this time Monday that Xbox will also announce a price raise just to match Sony. And yeah, even the Wii-like device, is it called the Mio or something, that just has a camera and you just wave your hands around, has raised its price, which weirdly that device has a chance of being more relevant for the longer times. If it wasn't the fact that you really just needed a subscription for that Mio device, it wouldn't be a terrible thing for me to get, even though I'd probably never play with it myself. But yeah, when you have random kids or random people wanting to play games, it's probably your best bet in that aspect, is not having to have controllers, not having to expect people to understand what they were doing. I actually, for the first time in my life, actually played, I think it was Halo 2, the Steam remastered version. Some kind of mods were on it, but I don't know if that really changed anything. And yeah, it's kind of an old school game. The button layouts are a little bit different. I heard somebody else talking about the difference between like Halo 1 and Halo 2 and how they just didn't like Halo 2. And I wondered if it wasn't the case that Halo 1 controlled with the original Xbox controller that they called the Duke. It was this huge controller. And Halo 2 came out with the 360, with the Xbox 360 controller, because I could see a different controller having a different feel. There might very well be gameplay reasons why Halo 1 and Halo 2 are different. I wouldn't know. I actually own the Halo Master Chief Collection. I don't really imagine I'd ever actually play it, and if I am going to play it, it is just going to be on single player. The gameplay style is just player versus player with a lot of ragdoll physics. I think that probably made it very popular, just to see characters getting blown up and ragdolling while getting shot and blood on the walls, and all of that would have been fairly unique in the Halo 2 era. But yeah, I ran around mostly not knowing what I was doing. Got a few kills, didn't win any of the competitions. I think there was definitely a case there where even the people who may have had some nostalgia for Halo 2 actually hadn't played Halo 2 in a long time, and so it almost certainly was a case where it was something that would have been better left in the past in the nostalgic mind of people versus actually pulling it out and playing it, which is a bad news certainly for any remake of Halo, but almost certainly a remake of Halo would have more modern controls. But yeah, I don't know if you're ever gonna find a way to make a game like Halo acceptable to the modern style of gameplay and to the audience that might actually be interested in playing that. It seems to me like it's very much the case that gamers move forward, not backwards, particularly gamers who play player versus player military shooter type games. Yeah. Let's look at what's on the Steam Deck and then move into the Video Games Chronicle articles. Yeah. Getting a little cold here. One thing I cannot do, as I'm attempting to use a little bit more electricity, is freeze myself out by having the air conditioner run more than I'd really like it to. But yeah, that's something I'll have to work on. But yeah, the games being played on the Steam Deck still seem to be just about the same as usual. I lent somebody a Ghibli movie, The Secret of Yeti, and I haven't actually watched it myself, and so that person came back to me and they said they were surprised that one of the voice actors in the English dub was Carol Burnett, which is very surprising to me too. Carol Burnett, a TV situation not sitcom, variety hour comedian, is what you really would call her. Carol Burnett Show and several other things with Carol Burnett in the name. Doing somewhat half improv, not half improv. I'd say it was half improv compared to what Whose Line Is It Anyways presented improv as. But I mean, yeah, she's really old. She's probably in her 80s, if not 90s, maybe in her hundreds. But yeah, I was definitely not expecting that. It is interesting that the Halo Master Chief Collection is being played on the Steam Deck, so there is clearly an audience there. But yeah, probably be a while before I have any free time to actually sit down and watch the Ghibli studio movie. Really, I don't think Ghibli's really working on any of the newer movies. But yeah, the era of a lot of old TV from my generation and generations before my generation, obviously, is drying up and dying, and there is really no new generations that are going to rise up to replace it, because TV now is much more watching YouTube a little bit, watching Netflix a little bit, watching Prime Video a little bit, and it's just become a real nightmare as far as the experience of actually trying to see something from beginning to end, or sticking with any channel or streaming service to see new things. I found out that the Tale of Two Kingdoms show, I think it might be the name of it, or Night of Seven Kingdoms might be the name of it. Yeah, I'd seen people like talking about that and seen like recommended YouTube videos, but I had not paid any attention to it at all. Apparently it's a prequel side story from the Game of Thrones universe and books. I was just like, okay, well, that makes me even less interested in really watching it, as somebody who didn't really have the opportunities to watch Game of Thrones and didn't seem like there was really a reason why I would want to watch it, because by the time I would have had the opportunity to watch it, they had already gone downhill with that horrible season. So yeah, that's in general though. The fantasy shows are not ones that grab my attention too much. I kind of liked The Outpost, but also I would say The Outpost was too low budget and maybe got a little boring and repetitive in the later seasons, when they started to have less of a general idea of what they were doing. In a lot of ways, The Outpost felt like a modern take on something like Hercules or Xena, versus Game of Thrones, which tries to be, let's do something big budget like Lord of the Rings, but on TV or HBO. Of course, Game of Thrones stands out in particular for being very violent and mature, or to a level of immaturity in its content, which puts it kind of in a mushy middle too. Like, at a certain point, if they were going to go with sex and violence, it would almost, to entertain me, it'd have to be something closer to Lex, Lexx, as far as a sex comedy nonsense sci-fi show. If they did that in the fantasy world for Game of Thrones, that might have been something that caught my attention more. But the serious elements of it bring it down in one direction, and the violence and nudity and sex in Game of Thrones drags it in another direction. So it just felt gratuitous, for lack of a better term. Okay, moving on. We'll go through the Video Games Chronicle story. Sources says Nintendo is planning a new Star Fox and a major Zelda remake this year, but no 3D Mario. I would suspect that is highly true, because there has been a new poster for the Mario Galaxy movie where they have shown Star Fox, which I'm not sure I particularly love the idea that Star Fox is going to be in any way connectable as a universe to the Mario universe, but I suppose the first Mario movie had already really hinted at that anyways, that there would be multiple lands and worlds for like Donkey Kong and inside the Mushroom Kingdom type universe. And honestly, it doesn't really hurt too much for them to be in the two universes, in particular if it helps Star Fox games actually get made and get released, which is the main priority, I think, really, to do. It is to just hope for more Star Fox types games. But in a lot of ways, it's also worth pointing out that while I liked Star Fox 64, I didn't really play any of the other Star Fox games, excluding Crystal Chronicles, which really wasn't a Star Fox game anyways. So it's not like there's been a long-running series of games under Star Fox that I personally played and liked. Another major Zelda remake. You've got a pick of quite a few different Zelda games that could be remade, certainly. And no 3D Mario seems very believable. It is definitely too early for a new 3D Mario, although it would have certainly been nice if there was a Mario Odyssey 2 that came out for the Switch 2. It probably would have been nice if there was a lot of games named 2 on the Switch 2. But yeah, it's a little premature for a new Mario game, even if it was just going to be a Mario Odyssey game. And certainly the sales numbers for the Switch 2 aren't going to really push the idea of making another Mario game. We very possibly won't see a new 3D Mario game until the next Nintendo console comes out. Yeah. But yeah. And certainly they can make a new Star Fox game, and it could be way closer to Crystal Chronicles or something else completely different, and not just a on-rail shooter game. The speculation would be Ocarina of Time as far as the biggest and most popular Zelda game to remake. It would probably be more interesting, though, if they remade like the first Zelda game. Although I don't know how much a remake of the first Zelda game would actually even look like the first Zelda game, if that was the case. And certainly there's just like far too many secret hidden things in the first Zelda game, and the second Zelda game would have a lot of problems too. If they were going to remake Ocarina of Time, I mean, you could certainly do it. The low polygon art style of Ocarina of Time could be improved upon. Some of the puzzles and some of the crossing over the large central area of in Ocarina of Time could be sped up and improved. I do think that there's a decent number of people that did not do everything in Ocarina of Time, and even a decent number of people that never even got to the credits of Ocarina of Time. So a remake of that could certainly be helpful. Although, is it really going to be a remake, or is it going to be a remaster? Though, you can't do too much craziness as far as Ocarina of Time. And certainly if you are going to remake Ocarina of Time and then you turned it into Wind Waker, where there's just a whole bunch of mountains and there's a stamina bar and you're cooking food and just playing like those games played, I would be very upset with that being called a remake at that point, because that's not what people would really want. Although maybe that is what the new audience and kids who played Wind Waker, not Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild is what I was talking about. Yep. Maybe the new generation of kids who played Breath of the Wild and its sequel are really expecting that from Zelda. And so we might very well have Zelda remakes that play very much like Breath of the Wild. And that is just going to be consistently going forward what Zelda is. But it does seem like the big surprise announcement and the focus will be Star Fox around the Mario Galaxy movie. And that they almost certainly are trying to push those new generation of Nintendo gamers to be hyped around Star Fox. Video Games Chronicle has a video here if you want to watch it of them playing a game called Nutmeg, a deck building football manager game. I don't think I would be particularly interested in watching that. Crimson Desert nears 5 million sales, Pearl Abyss's CEO says it's looking into a Switch 2 port. Okay. Compromises will have to be made, but the team is interested in doing it, he says. Alright. I don't know if Crimson Desert is particularly a great candidate for a game you'd want to play on handheld, and I'll leave that opinion at that. It's been confirmed PlayStation 5 console prices are being raised by $100. Sony confirms hardware price hikes. The PS5 Pro will now cost $900 from April 2nd. The cheapest digital PS5s are $600, and the premium is $900. Which effectively this hands a huge gift over to Valve now, because that's just $100 less pressure for whatever price tag Valve announces the Steam machine on. Although might not change too much if Valve still has to announce even a starter Valve machine as a $900 or $1,000 computer, which I heavily suspect at this point we're going to have Valve announce a bring your own RAM, bring your own hard drive model of the Steam machine. And with that, the price might be down to $600, maybe even a little lower. But then you're going to have to put in your own RAM sticks and source those. You're going to have to bring in your own hard drive, which hard drive space is hard drives are getting expensive too. And once you've done that, you might very well be back up to $900 or more. Yeah. So yeah, the timer has been started, certainly, to see when Microsoft announces a price raise. Let's see, a Switch 2 version of Devil May Cry 5 has been rated. It's going to be called Devil Hunter Edition, according to a Taiwanese ratings board. Okay. That's fairly believable. The Devil May Cry games do seem like they kind of come out with not enough press coverage and fairly weird timings. 2 classic Japanese horror series crossover as Fatal Frame 2 Remake gets a free Silent Hill F DLC today. Players can dress Fatal Frame 2's character as Silent Hill F's character Shimizu. Weirdly, though, I don't think this allows for anything to happen in Silent Hill F, which kind of means nothing. It doesn't feel like it's that much of a crossover, really. Silent Hill F has been, Fatal Frame as a series has been fairly consistent that they have put all kinds of different and weird outfits for the characters in Fatal Frame. So it really is no skin off their teeth to throw in one more costume. It is frankly way more interesting to watch this trailer just show off Fatal Frame 2 remake than it is to see a kind of boring, old-fashioned Japanese schoolgirl outfit, or a character with a wolf mask. Yeah. This is different. I have uBlock Origin on right now, but it feels like YouTube has changed its whole system too. Like, we're not getting just a bunch of recommended videos popping up, and there's a whole volume meter that was popping up for a second there. Maybe YouTube just changed things quite a bit. Let's see, Resident Evil Requiem's latest update adds a photo mode and changes some facial expressions. The update is rolling out to all platforms today. I wonder if the facial expressions are because the original expressions are goofy, or if the facial expressions are being added to change things in a more ridiculously subtle way. It might very well be the characters didn't have those animations and expressions animated at launch, and so you just had some kind of facial 3D animator who is still working on the game in secret, and now this is getting patched in. It says character expressions in some cutscenes have been adjusted to better convey emotion, which, yeah, I could see particularly the Japanese version of these characters perhaps not emoting as much as the Western versions of the characters would normally emote. I've also been seeing a meme, and I assume this spoils very little, where Leon apparently gives a gun with one bullet to the female protagonist. And the female protagonist, being terrified, puts the gun up to her own head, and he's like, "No, I didn't give it to you for you to shoot yourself." And then she replies, "Well, then why'd you only give me one bullet?" I would assume that there's a decent chance that's at the very beginning of the game or at the very end of the game that Leon meets up with the other protagonist and gives her a gun with one bullet. Yeah. It would make a lot of sense in the history of Resident Evil games if Leon showed up at the very end and gave some kind of super gun with one bullet or a rocket launcher to the other protagonist. I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm trying hard not to spoil myself on Resident Evil Requiem, so I will just enjoy the meme from what I can interpret, even if I'm going to interpret it incorrectly. Okay, so here's everything announced at the Xbox Partner Preview. A roundup of all the news, including Stranger Than Heaven and Hades 2. Okay. Are they going to present us in a nice fashion? Let's see. RoboCop Rogue City developer announced a new Hunter the Reckoning game is in development, which I think that was pretty obvious because they accidentally pushed a version of this game as the update for RoboCop Rogue City for a brief time, so they accidentally leaked that information. Kuro's free-to-play action RPG Wuthering Waves is coming to Xbox in July. I guess with this partner event, maybe that will be the reason why Xbox doesn't announce a price hike too soon. Outcast's game based on the sci-fi series The Expanse has been given a release window. Yeah, I was talking about Game of Thrones for a brief moment there. Apparently there's some kind of mobile Game of Thrones game I heard somebody talk about too, and I went, well, the only Game of Thrones game I had known before then was the Telltale one, which I don't believe is available for purchase anymore. The narrative farming sim Graves season is out in August. I actually did think that was a decent story. The Iron from Ice thought of the Telltale game in the Game of Thrones universe, but it very much was a story. There was a side story with side characters, and you just were not going to actually change any of the events of the main Game of Thrones show that was still airing when that was released. Let's see. Narrative farming sim. Yet another one of those. We got way too many of those getting announced. A new Serious Sam game called Shadowverse was announced for later this year. Let's watch that trailer. I'm going to try and skip most of these trailers, but yeah. I was beginning to fairly believe that the idea of making a Serious Sam game had just been abandoned. They had made the Talos Principle 2, and the reason they made Talos Principle 1 and Talos Principle 2 was in a lot of ways to improve the visuals in the game engine that Serious Sam was made and running on, but I kind of feel like they weirdly have had more success with the Talos Principle compared to the last couple of Serious Sam games. And even in this trailer, that entire Egypt environment is just art assets that were from Talos Principle 2. But then a lot of the spaceship stuff is not so much from Talos Principle 2. Yeah. Some of the darker in cave areas look like they might be something. And the game itself looks like it's definitely trying to encourage a lot of people to play together, and I just don't know how big of a fandom really exists around Serious Sam. Now, this is kind of funny. We have Super Meat Boy 3D releasing next week, but also we have the company that was publishing Super Meat Boy, I believe, laying off people. So yeah, it does seem like a weird bit of timing there, almost sabotage levels of announcements and timing there, but maybe it won't affect sales at all. And yeah, Super Meat Boy 3D looks like what I expect it to look like, which is why I will almost certainly never play it, because it is just going to be a high level of frustration platforming, and they are totally selling it on that high level of frustration. A game called Forever Ago has a re-announcement trailer. Then a hash and slash roguelike Ascend to Zero has also been revealed. Let's just play both trailers at the same time so we can be very ADHD and save some time. This is one of the beauties of having spent so much energy to turn this stream vertical, is that you do have that possibility of playing two videos at once, although in most cases it's pretty silly to do that. Yeah, the video up top there looks like it's one of those travel stories, and I don't even know what to best compare it to, really. It does just seem like there is a lot of games that have this kind of sentimental travel experience type events, type stories to be shown and told. Yeah. It's funny, but I guess games like this probably are still echoes of writers struggling to find a place in the video game world, or just in the world in general. When you see these games that probably are going to have minimal interaction points that feel like they are just trying to tell a story and not really have a lot of video game aspects, it just feels very far from the first-person shooter style of games that we tend to usually see. Of course, the writers that just want to tell a story can always make visual novels, but those don't really sell or look pretty enough for most audiences in the West. And writers certainly could just write actual novels, and that would be a thing too. Although it probably wouldn't sell as much. Dispatch is coming to Xbox this summer. Rebellion has announced a new horror sci-fi action game called Alien Deathstorm. And Frog Squad has a co-op extraction puzzle platformer. So, again, we'll just play 2 videos at once, and I'll probably pay most of my attention to Alien Deathstorm on top. Yeah. There are definitely games that feel like they're in that same style as Life is Strange, but I wouldn't say that they look like Life is Strange. But yeah, I guess maybe comparing them to Life is Strange is a bit of a bad comparison, and really we should just call them slice of life games. There is a certain level of low polygonness for those slice of life games. Yeah, they just don't have those darker color palettes or a high level of shooting things and violence. Alien Deathstorm didn't really show a ton there. You got a lot of visuals of an alien creature and pointing guns. But I'd say that's about it. There's a game called Bluey Snaps that's coming in the fall to Xbox. And then Stalker 2's first major story expansion, Cost of Hope, is coming this summer. And then Musa Dirty Fate is a dark action game inspired by Korean history. Have we seen that? And then a demo for The Eternal Life of Goldman. Again, we'll just play 2 trailers at once. Yep. And by the way, this does not really cause any frame drops as far as me uploading things. I have enough bandwidth certainly to play 2 videos, particularly if they're not trying to do full 1080p. And at a certain level it would be more the GPU power needed to play back 2 videos while also recording and streaming at the same time. And I'm more interested in The Eternal Life of Goldman. Like, weirdly, a platforming game feels a little Metroidvania-esque to it. Some weird mini games too. Yeah. Whereas the game inspired by Korean history on top looks alright, but it's not showing us too much, and a lot of stuff that it's showing us is in shadow, So it's not like we're getting a great image of armor or the face of characters or anything like that, which is something certainly to be cautious about, is to just not really lead up into assumptions about games where it might look really pretty in a few screenshots, but overall it might not have that consistent level of polish. It's still really a problem though, even streaming 2 trailers at once. Yeah, both trailers are trying their very best to be as fast paced as they can be, but yeah, you still are taking longer than I would like to get to the end of these trailers and 2-minute trailers. And there was something at the end here of the Eternal Life of Goldman where it felt like it might even be a little bit like Cuphead. Notice in particular that there has not been a game that has come out to try to either look like Cuphead or be let's not go any further with that video. Like be as difficult as Cuphead was. The idea of a platforming shooter game where you're just rushing through the bosses didn't really, I think, catch on as an idea. Probably because it takes a lot of work to make those type of games both playable and enjoyable. Like it's very, very easy to make a game like Cuphead too hard. I think personally, for me, Cuphead was too hard. And while I could have probably grinded my way through more of Cuphead than what I did and played the DLC, I really didn't want to do either one. I did make it somewhere towards the end of Cuphead, but I'm not sure that I actually got to fight the devil and beat the devil in Cuphead. Yeah, they definitely in Cuphead expected you to get good in that game, and there really was not a path to turn on easy mode and make it all the way through the end of the game. And even now, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea if Cuphead came out with an update where it's just like invincible mode. Beat the game all the way through without any concern of dying. Right, and just go back there and pause. And then last trailer we have here is Artificial Detective, is a debut title from Studio Vivix. I will say, looking at all these trailers, there's a color palette that is perhaps too consistent. Too many darks. Maybe too many robots as a theme too. But yeah. Even something slightly brighter and more colorful like Hades 2 is still pretty dark. It does feel like with these announcements there is really no desire at all for any kind of like kid audience in these announcements. Here you have just like a huge robot world seeming to happen here. And this kid that looks human at least has or had a Gundam toy. So it looks like you've got these kind of micro machine cubes They're infecting other robots. You have a interesting comparison here, certainly, in that this looks fairly similar to something like Pragmata, but it obviously is going to play faster and differently than Pragmata. Yeah. And the way it does look like it plays is way more interesting than the gameplay mechanics I've seen from Pragmata. That felt a lot like Bioshock 1, shooting the water and electrifying it, and having multiple enemies attack us at once, and a big creature like a Big Daddy to fight. Although I don't think it will be too close to Bioshock 1. And a lot of what Bioshock 1 is its story and its themes, so unless they're going to tell a story as interesting as that, it still really shouldn't be compared too much to Bioshock 1. Sniper Elite Studio Rebellion reveals Alien Deathstorm as a action horror first-person shooter. We definitely don't need to watch the trailers all the way through again. And in fact, I think we can just go ahead and close these stories. Hades 2 is coming to the PlayStation and Xbox next month. I feel it's very weird for the trailer to show kind of a topless naked back of this protagonist from Hades 2, which I don't really know the story of Hades 1, but it is interesting that there hasn't been that much of a complaint that the protagonist of the second game seems to be completely different from the appearance of the protagonist of the first game. I don't know if maybe they're the same character and they just changed appearance, or not, or whatever, but yeah, I would have suspected there would have been more complaints there. Apparently not. Maybe Hades 1's story just explains it away very well. Stalker 2's first major story expansion we talked about. Let's see. Apparently, Stranger Than Heaven will take place over 5 eras. Wow, eras are pretty long. Each era in Japan is a different emperor ruling. So you're talking effectively 5 emperors' lifetimes there. And that is actually quite a lot for any one game. Maybe era doesn't mean what I think it means, because, yeah, 1915, 1929, 1943, 1951, and 1965 don't feel like different periods. And maybe that's what they call them in Japanese, is like the Edo period. And so maybe era means something different, because yeah, this really is one person's lifetime. Jumping around that much is not as hard because the time frames are pretty close to each other. The buildings will be in about the same spots. They may have different textures and appearance to them, and overall gameplay, I think, will still be just about the same. And at a certain level, I guess, to protect my YouTube channel, I probably shouldn't even watch any trailers from any Xbox announcements if one trailer potentially is going to have a naked back of a character. There is an interesting question that whether the Mafia the Old Country game should have had a similar 5-era story. 5 cities, 5 eras. That is even way more ambitious, certainly, though, to have 5 different cities. I would suspect each city is in its own era, though, and not be a case that each of the 5 cities can appear in each of the 5 different eras, because then you have a 5 times 5 multiplier of what the whole amount of animation would have to be made to make it look that way. I imagine it's pretty much a linear story where you jump forward in time and you happen to be in a different city. There is a red flag certainly here though, in that this might very well be 5 cities that are really small because they are just cut content that were going to show up in some other game, and so they've just merged 5 teams worth of unfinished homework together to make a game and shove it out there. Which, yeah, I think this publisher and developers pushing out too many games too fast, and they're saturating the market that was already pretty small. 3 weeks after accidentally being uploaded to Steam, the new Hunter the Reckoning game is now official, which is probably a great example of where leaks and things like that just don't really matter. Like, whether this was an intentional leak or not, I don't know, but like, it doesn't really likely affect sales numbers, and it doesn't do anything but waste the video gamer's time. It's just not something worth bothering to worry about. When games are actually out and available for purchase is when you should start thinking about them, not when they've not even been announced yet. Certainly you can plan a little bit ahead, but I don't know any gamers that actually plan out a budget ahead of time and are actually trying to do anything at all with their budgets. They tend to just buy games on day one and play what their friends are talking about. And so, yeah, unless you are the one friend that is hyped on a game, you really don't need to know anything about new games coming out. And it tends to seem like it's the case that too many groups of friends influence each other and hype each other up on new games, and then they get bored with those games a lot of times very fast. Definitely seems like that is the case, is that you'll see groups of friends where one person is really hyped on a game, they play it for a week or two, then they stop playing it, and then they just move on to the next game. Effectively, it creates that entire group of friends to be suckers, for lack of a better term, in that they are just paying a lot of money for day one releases of games that they are barely playing. And that's not good for the industry. It would be the equivalent of going to the theaters and every single movie sucking, which is why a lot of people stopped going to the movies, although I imagine a lot more people stopped going to the movies because it was just too expensive. But if it's not good enough for the price, it kind of sucks as a movie, doesn't it? And maybe just the quality of movies need to go up too. Yep, Fox McCloud is officially appearing in the Mario Galaxy movie. There is some things you could say here. First of all, this is weird that there isn't a down triangle here, and it's kind of weird to have a second row on what looks like a belt. It almost feels like what you do is you push this and then robotically the zipper goes down, then you push this and robotically the zipper goes up, back up, and then maybe this, I don't know, does something completely different, and maybe this does something completely different. But yeah, it feels like they are buttons, not medals or anything that would be something to show off. But yeah. And then this kind of blue puffy jacket feels different and new. Certainly the visual style looks different. I definitely had the feeling when I watched the first Mario movie that the Mario being depicted in the Mario movie was not my Mario, not the Mario I grew up thinking of and having in my mind as a character. I can certainly say visually a lot of the Star Fox character does not look like the Star Fox character that I would have in my mind. But yeah, I don't think that will be a major sticking point in the Mario Galaxy movie. I think this character is going to show up maybe in the middle of the credits or after credits roll, not not in the first half of the movie. And yeah, there certainly is a danger that you do have in the Mario Galaxy movie just a lot of cameos and a lot of lack of focus on even the established characters that would be the main characters. I suppose it is also worth thinking about and looking up whether there are any after credit scenes in the Mario Galaxy movie. Be good to know. I guess nowadays it's pretty much the helpful thing to look up. I know for a brief time there, some of the Alamo Drafthouse theaters or theaters like that were announcing that there were no after credit scenes for movies if there were no after credit scenes, just to get people to not sit there and waste their time. Plus, I imagine movie theaters would love for people to leave as soon as the credits roll so they can have a little bit more time cleaning the ridiculously easy to get dirty theaters. They really should think of a better system overall as far as how the theaters are designed and laid out, because there is just a lot of people that leave trash everywhere. And yeah, that seems weird. But yeah, I feel like I'm losing momentum on this conversation as I speak. So let's move forward and then I'll take my first break. Switch 2 and PS5 versions of Mugenics have been teased by the developers. Videos of the game running on both consoles were shared online. Makes a lot of sense. Also, perhaps speaks very much to the lack of Xbox popularity. It is certainly interesting how it is nowadays fairly easy to also be developing on Switch 2 and PlayStation. Whereas 2 or 3 generations ago, it would have been a nightmare to try to develop a game to run on a Nintendo or Sony console. PlayStation 3 era, Nintendo 64 era, very difficult. The Dark Outlaw Games founder says it effing sucks that Sony closed his studio, but games are scrapped all the time. Which, I mean, do you really need a full headline for that? Yep. The large amount of games that do get scrapped before they're announced is another problem with the game industry. It's just something gamers will never really know about. And it almost certainly leads to games costing more. That being said, I don't think it makes the situation any better if there was some legal reason why every game in development that gets canceled has to be announced and talked about. Maybe that would have more ideas float about and give examples of bad ideas that couldn't get funding. But overall, I think it would just have gamers wanting a game that statistically probably wouldn't really sell. The suspicion heavily is going to be that publishers don't know really what gamers want. And while that may very well be the case, it may very well also be the exact opposite, that publishers absolutely know what people are willing to pay for, and they know that while something might have a very outspoken niche following, the game itself may only sell a few thousand copies, which is not enough to profit. It seems like the statistics as far as games making money on Steam are also not really going up. More and more games are getting released on Steam, but the same percentage, or not the same percentage, the same number of games are actually getting good sales numbers, which means the percentage is actually going down for successful games that are getting released on Steam. And a big part of that is games just not being discoverable, not putting out press releases, not promoting their games well enough, which that is certainly the big second hurdle around video games, is that you can't just make a good game. You have to find a way to advertise that good game, and that is a whole different skill set, and usually is a thing that is done by publishers putting millions of dollars into advertising. Yeah. It doesn't feel like this game company actually had or has anything to really talk about as far as what was being developed. Yeah. Confirmed the game being worked on wasn't a live service title, and stressed that he couldn't talk more about it due to confidentiality agreements. I don't know what this trailer of people talking with animations. I assume that's what this is that this is just somebody talking over a looped animation, which it's a rough looped animation. If we look at it, you can see the chats popping up in the middle on Twitch, but there are little speech bubbles going back and forth at the same time, and then very dramatic movements. Definitely feels like a lot of these characters, if not all these characters on the screen, are fan art creations of Persona 4 or Persona 5 characters, if I was to guess. Although one of the characters does look like they might be from Final Fantasy. I definitely have given some small thought to having kind of like looped animations like this, but I mean, that is too dramatic of movements and too often of looping things. If you have this few of animations, you really should slow it down, and like every 10 seconds, every 30 seconds, swap an animation out. Not this much. And yeah, if you're going to depict two characters talking, you should probably have one talk, then the other, then the other. And certainly that would have given you a few more variations on the animations. Let's see, the Mega Man DLC pack is now available for Sonic Racing Crossworlds. The DLC includes 2 racers plus a new car, track, and music selection. Crossworlds still going on and still not getting as much coverage as I think it deserves. And then Nintendo confirms its US Switch 2 games will soon cost more as physical editions. There was a follow-up message I saw here that said at least to start, the price for physical hardware, physical games are going to stay the same, but digital games are going to start to be $10 cheaper. But also with the follow-up, the actual stores determine the price, so you may very well see the stores keep the price the same both for physical and digital, and just pocket the difference. Because yeah, what the store pays for a game and what a consumer pays for the game are not really connected to each other in any way. So yeah, I imagine this is in part an effort to slowly boil the frog, and the idea, even now, that Nintendo games are $70 is crazy. Nintendo games really should probably be closer to $40 or $50, with rare exceptions. And yeah, you definitely aren't seeing those kinds of prices for your average game on Steam. And if it weren't for the fact that Nintendo games aren't on PC, there would be no reason anybody should buy a Nintendo game of any sort. Weirdly, the level of piracy and emulating even Switch 2 games, I think, is just going to come by so much faster and so much easier than older consoles. You could easily skip a generation or two of Nintendo games and then emulate those games later on if you really wanted to play them. Or you could just wait for remakes. And I imagine that's what a lot of people are doing, is they're skipping the Switch 2 to expect that some kind of Switch 3 is going to come out and have a remake or better version of any of the Switch 2 games, or at least slight remasters. Alright, before we go to the Gamatsu articles, I'm gonna take a break, but I did want to show here these event 1500 days since global launch celebration campaign is going on, and then they're selling all kinds of stuff around that. Yep. In a lot of ways, I guess Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has done what it needed to do. Very satisfactory. It offers a way for people who actually want to duel online to duel. And it doesn't burden you with terrible monetization too much, and it doesn't create a ridiculous, chaotic experience where they're changing the meta too often. So yeah, I will, once I swap back to the program, pause the recording now and be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So let's go through the Gematsu news. Now, I imagine we'll have a lot of overlap in general from the same announcements. But first of all, I'm going to turn this on for uBlock Origin. Yep. Again, without my ad blocker, just in general cleaning up the internet to make it usable, these pages will just have ridiculous pop-ups pop up. Blue Reflection Quartet has been announced for PS5 and Switch 1 and 2 and PC. It's due out July 30th. Blue Reflection, I believe, is the JRPG. I may have briefly mentioned it in the last stream, where it is all Japanese schoolgirls going into a fantasy world. Which, yeah, definitely gives it a slightly different feel when you don't have inherently large amounts of male characters or any male characters at all. It doesn't, I don't think this series really has a ton of like attractive attempts for a male audience at all. I think it really is a game for girls, or at least Japanese girls. And you can see there's a lot of focus on the costumes and the transformations. And there's friendship as an aspect. But yeah. So many games around the world are targeted towards the cisgendered straight male, that something like a series like Blue Reflection does do a nice job of trying to balance that out a little bit. And there was one male protagonist, and there may very well be some Yuri in this game, some lesbian overtones and girl-on-girl romances. But yeah, I don't think that's the focus. This is really, I think, just more for attracting the female gamer, which I imagine worldwide there's still a lot of opportunity to try to attract female gamers. And one of the things to point out here is that it seems like a lot of these characters are either breaking what would be reality and wearing completely different types of outfits, which doesn't make sense unless they were all coming from different schools. But yeah, you just would not have different color palettes and different styles of outfits if they were all going to the same school. Even if they were different years at the different school, the uniforms for each Japanese school are pretty specific. And yeah, a lot of them are way more boring than what gets shown. I wonder what the quartet theme really would mean or imply. This is the 9th anniversary of Blue Reflection, so it's almost a decade old. Yeah, rated T for teen, fantasy violence, suggestive themes. Yeah, it seems to me like it's an all girls school, which I don't know how many of those actually exist in Japan, but I imagine there's a few, but they tend to be mixed gendered. This looks like Quartet may be the 4th game in the series. There's probably been several remasters, why I've heard more about the series. And in a lot of ways, this is potentially just Persona story at a certain extent. I mean, there's not much variety one can really do to change things up from here's a bunch of young characters that obviously would be in school moving on to a alternate world to have a fantasy adventure. Seems like one of those was in part a game based off of an anime, so I imagine the anime Blue Reflection also has a story arc. And if anything, it seems like these 4 games are centered around a group of friends that reappear with every game, which is nice compared to like Persona 3 and Persona 4 just having completely different groups of people. I'm watching the trailer here and trying to eat yogurt at the same time. That's one of the problems of starting late too, is that if I'm not careful, I'll just be starving to death by the time I'm done streaming. Definitely looks like there's a whole chart system here talking about timelines potentially and connections between people. So there might be a lot more sci-fi elements. It is interesting how the trailer barely shows even what the enemies are. They pretty obviously are not fighting each other, I would guess. And I definitely say this game feels a lot more Sailor Moon than the Edgelord of Persona 3. Where that's more, I mean, well, Persona is a spin-off series of Shin Megami Tensei is the name of it, Shin Megami Tensei. Yeah, which is Devil Summoner series. So there would be more devils in that series. If this is the 4th game and each game is one summer of high school kids, well then that probably means that this would be the last summer for this group of people. They could push it certainly into a Japanese college level for a couple more years, but I mean they're not gonna go for 4 more games with those characters unless they do some kind of time rewindy thing. This is Koei Tecmo, and I think one of their big successes, Blue Reflection, so I imagine there will be more games in the series. You do have a little bit of a problem, certainly with something like Blue Reflection, in that the art style on a single still thumbnail looks a little bit too much like a visual novel. I wouldn't really be upset with somebody if they just looked at this and assumed it was a visual novel instead of being a full JRPG style game. There is also perhaps too many JRPG games that are smaller and more niche, like Blue Reflection, like what was the other one that just got a game announced for it? I don't think I'm going to be able to remember the name of it. Neptunia. The Neptunia series just got a new game. Yeah, having both of those announced back to back doesn't really help, and potentially having both of those games come out too close to each other is not really going to help. Let's see, PlayStation 5 and PlayStation Portal price increases have gone up. Previously the Portal was $199, now it's $249, so $50 increase for that. Still not really a product I would recommend to anybody. but now even more so, because yeah, that is too expensive. Super Meat Boy physical 3D editions have been announced for the PS5 and Switch 2. Inazuma 11 Victory Road force its fourth free major update, the Rising Bond DLC, launches March 31st, which I'd assume this is still doing well. Weirdly, I don't have a link popping up here. And I would have thought that there would have been a link to the Steam page for Inazuma 11. I assume the game is still probably selling well, but can't really check without wasting a bunch of time. Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection free updates is going to add a powerful Royal Monsters this summer. I don't know how well Monster Hunter Stories 3 is doing. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink Endless Ragnarok Meet the Crew Eustace trailer. So we have a trailer here if you want to watch that on Gamatsu. The sci-fi romance visual novel collection My Mary May will be announced for no, it's My Mary May with B has been announced for Switch. And this definitely feels like this is based off an anime from like the 80s. And it definitely feels like more of a 80s name, where it's kind of silly and kind of doesn't make any sense in English. Yeah, it's a remastered version of the sci-fi visual novel that was first released on the PlayStation 2 on June 30th, 2005. So we're talking 21 years ago, which, yeah, it being sci-fi, it having this art style, that makes a lot of sense. Almost don't want to watch the opening movie just because there's too much risk of a Content ID claim or something flashing up as far as toplessness. But yeah, in a lot of ways, this is the kind of art style of anime that I often miss. Sure, when you look at it zoomed in like this, it's a little pixely, and it definitely doesn't have a ton of color tones and a ton of detail in like the hair. You have very much just like a simplistic nose and mouth and giant anime eyes. But yeah, I wish there were more remakes and just throwbacks for these older visual novels that almost certainly everybody in the West has missed, and anime and video games. And certainly you can feel the 2000 era, like even then, still being close to the 90s era of anime, where you have a robot character that is topless and just a lot of cheesecake and Gainax style boob bouncing. I will watch this trailer later on just to see what it looks like off screen. Let's see, the Resident Evil Requiem photo mode update is now available. Seems like they may have brought back the Raccoon City raccoon mascot, which there's a bunch of these to shoot in RE2 Remake. I'm not sure I'm gonna find them all. And then stars, stickers, also seem like things you can just put all over it. This is probably a great example of the type of game that really doesn't need a photo mode, and people are really not going to use the photo mode. In a lot of ways, I think if you are debugging your game and you have a photo mode and you can release that at launch, by all means release it. But if you are just putting it out weeks later after launch, alongside some bug fixes and other stuff, it's not really an attractive sell, particularly for Resident Evil, where it's just going to be horror zombies. Stellar Blade, maybe it has some loot or costumes, so photo mode makes more sense there. But yeah, I would say 88% of all video games don't really benefit by having a photo mode. It would certainly be nice if it was just built in, and then to a certain extent you can just take a screenshot on almost any game on PC. But trying to pose people, trying to get specific photos is not something I think gamers really waste their time on. Here we can see this screenshot showing the remnants of the main central hall in Resident Evil 2 of the Raccoon City Police Department. After Raccoon City got nuked, there really shouldn't be anything here. But yeah, everything they're showing here just feels out of place, and frankly a little bit inappropriate to the feel and the idea of the game. But yeah, photo mode is also a mode that's very easy to ignore. It does push a weird thought that Resident Evil Requiem is just the new benchmark game, whereas people are still using like Cyberpunk 2077 very often as a benchmark game to just see the visuals of a game or the performance of a computer running a game. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake has its Silent Hill F collaboration costume DLC now available. Again, pretty boring looking costumes. A roguelite match 3 puzzle adventure game called Dial Loop launches April 20th. Which, do I really want to watch a trailer for something like this? Yeah, visually it seems like a very busy game. Dial up, I guess maybe is what it's supposed to be, or you're tuning a dial in co-op or something. Don't really like the voxel based 3D models. Characters don't like the way the gameplay seems to be distracting and busy. Yeah, I definitely feel like this is just not a game for me. Maybe it's not co-op, maybe it's character versus character. I guess it is character versus character. And generally I would assume that there's already some kind of online player versus player match 3 type game, but you know, there is a decent possibility that nobody has been able to either find an audience or do the net code programming necessary to have player versus player. But yeah, this trailer is so off-putting to me, I don't even want to continue to watch it. Yeah. So I'm gonna put this on the follow list specifically just because I want to look at it, but notice that it's in early access. We do have a leaving date now that they heavily encourage people to fill in. Doesn't mean it's accurate. And the 24-hour peak of this game was 5 players. This came out February 15th, 2026. So, yeah, this game is pretty much dead in the water. Let's see, Devil May Cry 5 Devil Hunter Edition rated for the Switch 2 in Taiwan. Here's Monster Hunter 3. Monster Hunter Stories 3, 78% positive. Yeah, has single player, sports English language. I can guess put it over on the wish list. Here's Blue Reflection Quartet. It's not out yet, I don't believe. It would be interesting to get a general idea of the other Blue Reflection games. So, yeah. It is an interesting split that Koei Tecmo is also the publisher of the Atelier series, which is way more popular, and the Fatal Frame games, which, at least Fatal Frame Project Zero from 2003. So yeah, they're potentially saturating the market too much and competing against themselves. But it may very well also be the case that Blue Reflection and Atelier are just different enough, one being a fantasy world, one being based out of the real world to some extent. Or it might be that one team works on Blue Reflection while the other team works on Atelier games, and they use the same engine and code in a lot of cases. I don't think I've found all the Blue Reflection games on Steam. I see Second Light, I see the first one, but I don't see the third one. Which I'm pretty sure there is a third one. But then again, maybe Quartet is just one small expansion, and then it adds the third one and the first one and the second one together. I don't know if that's really how it would play. Oh, by the way, I should also mention that Firefox is updated and it's decided to act very wonky with the tabs now, so my tabs feel like they're going all over the place. But yeah, the original Blue Reflection, 80% positive with 1,252 players. 24-hour peak, however, for a single player game is only 10 players, so it is pretty niche. And I cannot, with teen rating, partial nudity, and suggestive themes, really say that this is a little girl game. This is a teenage girl game, it feels like. But yeah, usually by the time gamers in the West, girl gamers in the West, are teens, they are already into games, or they're not girl gamers and they never are likely to be one. Second Light is 82% with slightly fewer reviews from 2021. And I would assume there are some translation things. Although noticeably, Second Life also doesn't have any partial nudity, so even the censorship at the time seems to have been kicking in. You see more from Koei Tecmo. It's not exclusively pushing you towards Blue Reflection games. It's pushing you to Atelier games also. Yeah. You definitely would think that there would be 2 or 3 more games like this, game series like this, but no, not really. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it is also a case that, like, despite many sitcoms adding a wife, adding a female main character, there are very few sitcoms or TV shows where it's mostly women. You get a few occasions. You have like Golden Girls and maybe Desperate Housewives, but usually shows are very specifically centered around a male protagonist, with usually one female for every 4 or 5 male characters in order of importance. Although, of course, I don't watch a lot of like Oprah Winfrey Network or Lifetime shows where the balance would be the exact opposite of that. Moving on, AD 2846 set action adventure game called Artificial Detective has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. I guess AD 2846 is just the year. It's not some kind of special universe. It kind of read, when I first read it, like it was some novel series or something like that that is all set in that time frame. Yeah. It is getting more and more fantasy, I suppose, at this point, to write a story or tell a story with robots actually walking around and being androids and human in their form factor. It's just not, those aren't really stories being told now, and the thought, I think, is much deeper that we will deal with artificial intelligence algorithms that don't have human brains. Is the Devil May Cry version that is already available on Steam, and you can see it's 96% positive, just overwhelmingly positive. And I don't think there's a huge need to go back and try and play any of the previous Devil May Cry games. You can try and you'll probably enjoy it, but I think you could probably jump in on 5 and be alright. Hades 2 is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series on April 14th. Leave it at that. Then the Grand Blue Fantasy Relink Endless Ragnarok upgrade kit we talked about. And then here's Inazuma 11, centering around 85 to 89% positive. Well, 89% overall and 85% in the last 30 days. A very positive game. Positively received game. I don't know if the game itself is positive or not. Sci-fi tactical RPG Vaunted has been announced for PC, due out in early access in 2026. Do we have a trailer for it? No, we just have some screenshots, it feels like. Vaunted. Feels like it's half Bolt, half Haunted. So this first character I see looks pretty cartoony and something that I could see a lot of people not being interested in playing as. But I think they are probably doing a decent job of introducing these kinds of weirder characters in a trailer early, where there was that Sony game that just put out a trailer with some generic looking alien creatures, and reception was pretty poor, and I believe that game was canceled before it even launched, just based on reception of the visuals. Which that was a fairly weird experience, certainly. Usually you don't have gamers just absolutely rejecting the visuals of a game before it even comes out, but I do think that the demand for more unique and more artistically crafted character designs is probably a lot higher than it once was, and you do need your game to look good. It doesn't inherently have to always look distinctive. It's nice when it's distinctive, but good, I think, trumps distinctive very often. Here we can see Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake is 85% complete. I mean, 85% positive, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that on the wish list. I don't know if there is any version of the original Frame on Steam. Probably doesn't really matter too much, but it would be nice if there was a Fatal Frame remake for the first game. It definitely felt like it was a case where the Silent Hill F game felt like a Fatal Frame game. Okay. So, yeah. So, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is the first game, and somehow I just totally missed that because that really should be on my wish list. It's rated very positively, 92% in the last 30 days. I would assume that this is a remake version and that there is not a different version to be worried about or some side game. See, this is a funny thing though. Like, what does that link open up then? Also, this Fatal Frame game that we're looking at right now feels more like a Resident Evil style game where you're inside a house more versus running around the forest, which is what I kind of remember. Yeah, there's a totally different Fatal Frame game. So one is called Maiden of Black Water. One is called Mask of Lunar Eclipse. So this tells me that there is just more games to potentially investigate. There might be more games that are also not on Steam. This is also very positively. Does feel more indoor too. And I think this was one of the ones where the costumes got a little bit more suggestive than they probably should be. Yeah. So there is Fatal Frame Project Zero. There's Fatal Frame Project 02 Crimson Butterfly, and then there's Fatal Frame Project 03 The Tormentor that we know about, or The Tormented. And I wouldn't be surprised if Fatal Frame 3 is not actually available on Steam, and we're gonna get like a remake of that third game potentially. Although Maiden in Blackwater might be the third game. Yeah, that definitely creates a confusing situation. As far as what order of these games were released. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to do some more research. Which is funny how much time and effort I've spent over my life doing research on games to potentially buy them and never get around to buying them. Here we can see Resident Evil Requiem. And it is still overwhelmingly positive. And yeah, I think that is just going to be that. Like, people still playing it. I imagine it might have a decent New Game Plus, like all the other Resident Evil games. It'd be very weird if it didn't. And so I could see a lot of people are into their second or third playthrough of the game. But it might also be the case that a lot of people are still sticking to it because they actually are scared. I'm always a little surprised by how many adult people say they're too scared for something like a video game or a movie, but yeah, people have different levels of tolerance for it, and a lot of people don't have any tolerance for horror movies at all, so yeah, there is definitely a possibility that not all games are made for everybody. Let's see, The Eternal Life of Goldman is coming on Game Pass Day 1. Xbox Series demo is now available. And that brings us to Hades 2. Overwhelmingly positive. To very positive. Is it still in early access? No, it is not. So there's no real reason why I shouldn't be playing it. Other than I just have not enough time. I haven't played the first game, so really I should be playing the first game first. And yeah, I'm just sliding down in my chair, which is very noisy with a inflating pressure alternating cushion on it, which I'm almost 100% certain that the pressure alternating cushion on my bed popped and is now pretty useless. Let's see, 17th century Korea set dark action game Musa Dirty Fate has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Put fonted on the follow list. Kind of out of order still, these tabs. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl expansion Cost of Hope was announced. Here is the artificial detective game. Bluey Happy Snaps announced for all consoles and PC. I'd assume this is a game around photography, but honestly it looks more like a point and click adventure game, I would say, than a Pokemon Snap type game, which is what I was hoping it would be. Let's actually see it in movement for a brief second here. Apparently Bluey's house is on top of a hill. I imagine there's a decent chance that the first generation of people who were into Bluey might be growing out of Bluey at this point. Of course, Bluey could just have long life potential and follow that generation as they grow up. But yeah, I was reminded of like Jake and the Neverland Pirates being something that seemed like it was popular a few years back, and I imagine anybody who had seen that show when they were a kid is now way older and not into it. Of course, that is still a very recent show compared to the cartoons I watched when I was a kid. Yeah, not a lot of gameplay being shown there in that trailer. Eternal Life of Goldman, I've already seen, but I didn't watch the trailer, I imagine. Frog Squad launches in June for Xbox Series and PC. Which, yeah, I probably am not going to be too interested in that. Then we have Dispatch was coming to Xbox. There's that game, Ascent to Zero, which I doubt I'd be super interested in it, but who knows. I might review really well. Rebellion Developments announces first-person action horror game Alien Duststorm. Is Rebellion Developments a different company or subdivision of Rebellion, I wonder? Yeah, I've never heard of Rebellion Developments. Frog Squad. This patch is coming to Xbox Series this summer. And then Ascend to Zero launches July 13th for Xbox and PC. And Bluey. Yeah, and this Forever Young. Yep. It feels like it's got just too much of a slice of life feel in a lot of it. And it kind of feels like if you were trying to make a point and click adventure game in 3D, but as far as we know, this might also just be a lot of walking. It might be a straight up walking simulator. You see his character standing here and then here. What do I see in those three screenshots is somebody walking towards something with not a lot in the middle. So yeah, I don't know if there is room for 3D adventure games or Telltale type games in the minds of most gamers. Super Meat Boy 3D. The road trip adventure game Forever Go launches this fall for modern consoles and PC. Maybe it is the road trip aspect that is unappealing to me, but no, I think it's more just kind of a lack of gameplay. When I think of point and click adventures, I think of silly point and click adventures, LucasArts style point and click adventure games or Sierra type point and click adventure games. This doesn't look or feel like a game like that. Of course, nobody's really trying to sell it as a point and click adventure. This we've already got on the following list, but that would be the closest thing that I would compare it to. This is a mobile game for you to start, so I don't need to pretend like we're going to make a YouTube short around that. Here's the Hunter Reckoning Death Wish, which seems like a lot of words. Weirdly, this series, despite being leaked, is the one we didn't watch a trailer on up until this point. Is this a game where you are hunting werewolves and vampires, it looks like? I guess that would be what the thumbnail says. I don't know how you make a great story or how the story is made better by having both werewolves and vampires out there, because they tend to fight amongst each other. So if the hunter is a third faction, a human, then yeah, I don't know the real value in that. And see, this trailer implies that you're going to do a lot more detective work and a lot less just randomly shooting people. Neck tattoo, blonde hair, bleach blonde hair. Hacker side characters. Looks like they may have a whole team. Sorry, I'm still eating the yogurt. Yeah, I was having a real hard time just finding something that would have been a quick snack to eat on. Alright, so I didn't show really a ton of stuff, and this screenshot in particular seems to be showing a zombie creature. And when you look at the other screenshots, they are noticeably lacking in people. So yeah, it almost feels like this might just be a detective experience where there's nobody around. Really small scale type game. Being labeled as an RPG is interesting, to say the least. Yeah, I'm not going to immediately say there's no chance of it being a good game, but it's not showing me a lot. Whereas Nippon Marathon Daijobu instead is showing me quite a bit. Unfortunately, it is just a bunch of random nonsense that I have no interest in really promoting or... well, you know what? I'll make a YouTube short on it, but really just to see if I get some extra views. Pocket Mirror Golden Neurotrom? I don't even know what that word would mean. It's rated very positively. It's already on my wish list, so I don't know why this game is open. Like, it doesn't seem like it's coming to any new consoles. Maybe we'll see a story like that, but this is from 2023 and looks like it's one of those RPG looking horror games, if I was to guess. Yeah, they're even saying it's an acclaimed RPG maker gothic horror game. Take you on a journey of self-discovery. Yeah. And so if you're willing to put RPG maker in the description of your game, this must have been at the peak point of when RPG maker was somewhat popular before momentum against anything RPG maker turned extremely negative. And yeah, they changed the name from RPG Maker to Game Maker and maybe changed their engine to be a little bit more modern and more capable of doing something slightly different than RPG Maker type games. But I don't think there's a huge chance of people being happy with games that are made with Game Maker and still look like an RPG Maker game, which we've seen a significant drop off, thank goodness, of the low effort asset flip style RPG Maker games. I imagine that means very few people were actually making those games, and it was just single organizations churning out tons of them. But it may also be that the message just came out very solidly that weren't able to profit from that. In general, I think RPG Maker and same spin-off game engines from the same developer is too easy of an engine to make something that looks too much like a video game without actually putting people through their paces as far as knowing how to make games or program games, or have good ideas, or be able to secure funding, or be able to add secondary game mechanics like lockpicking or anything really. And that's where the RPG Maker style games really started to fall apart, is that they had just the basic features that were already coded for the developers and very little else. On the way, we're looking at Sudden Strike 5 here. This game is not out yet. Seems like we're going to start just looking at random games, and I don't know why. Amnesia Rebirth, again a game that doesn't make sense to be open. Ace Combat 8, Wings of Thieves. This ZPF game isn't out yet, and I feel like it's, there should be a article that would explain why we're looking at all these games, but I don't know. It's not like these are things that feel like they'd be in a humble bundle or things that are brand new, just about out. So, there must have just been one page that had a real weird amount of random game links. I don't know why that would be the case. Heck, it might be because of the ad blocker being down. Yeah. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl originally came out in 2024. I would not have expected them to put out any new DLC. Grounded 2, still a game that would require me to figure out some new way to record it and talk about it. It does seem like there's still a decent number of people playing Grounded 2. So it must have a certain appeal, particularly considering how Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as a movie is. It's a fine movie to watch once, but it's not to the level of something you should obsess about. It's not that good of a movie. The Expanse of Cyrus Reborn, we'll put that on the follow list. Serious Sam Shattered Storm. Yeah, it just feels like these games are games, some of them are things we would have talked about potentially an hour ago. Yeah, man. I didn't realize how long we've gone already today. Starting late and going long. Well, all I can try and do is persevere in my uncomfortable scenario that I'm in right now. I'm not sure. 100% positive, only 33 user reviews, I guess means just leave it on the follow list for now. I could put it on the wish list, but I'll give it some more time. Put that on the follow list. Definitely a lot of these games feel like things we looked at in the last stream. Maybe these are tabs that were left open for some reason, I don't know. If that would really be the case though, I'm pretty sure I didn't have anything left over, but my computer did get turned off and turned back on, so there is a small possibility that it reloaded a old save of the tabs. I don't think Invisible Hand is something I'm interested in. Constraint 2 I don't have. Constraint 1 I do have. And yeah, finally we're back to Gamatsu articles. It was Super Meat Boy 3D launching March 31st. Yeah. Stranger Than Heaven confirmed for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Serious Sam Shatterverse announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Grave Seasons launches August 14th. The expansion Osiris Reborn launches in spring of 2027. Wuthering Waves comes to the Xbox Series in July. Under the Reckoning Death Wish announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Pocket Mirror Gold Trom is coming to PS4 and PS5. So now we're seeing why all those Steam links were open. They were open to the left of the articles. Nippon Marathon 2 Daijobu launches in early access on April 17th. High Above launches April 9th. Build your dream rooftop above the city noise. I know there was a survivalist game where you were on a rooftop and the world was flooded. That obviously is a different game than this. Yeah. Very rarely does someone own a rooftop and really have the ability to use it however they want. You first of all would have to have a flat top roof, which would have to have decent drainage, but usually if a building has more than say 4 or 5 floors, there's water tanks on the roof, there's air conditioner condensers on the roof, there's just building maintenance stuff on the roof. And so the idea of having a concert hall, for instance, on your rooftop is pretty ridiculous, or a pool, maybe, if you're really rich. Of course, if you're rich, you can do just about it. An outdoor kitchen with a hot tub, not really likely. or an outdoor pergola bench to sit on. And you could probably build that, but yeah. It's an odd concept, even to start with. It feels like The Sims, if The Sims was limited to one room. Yeah. It does feel like it's the obsession of designers of this game, but that obsession feels very much out of line with what I think most people would be concerned about. Yeah. But yeah, I guess maybe they're putting a cloud sci-fi spin on it, where rooftop is the only place where you can see the sky. But like weirdly too, it does just feel like it's a room decorating software and not a game of any sorts, where I could see this concept being a weird enough concept that maybe that is a part of a video game, that you're in this world high above the clouds. But I don't think the game that you create from that is something close to The Sims. I'm gonna put this on the follow list, but honestly, I do not see the appeal. Sudden Strike 5 launches April 23rd. Amnesia Rebirth is coming to the Switch 2 on April 30th. Ace Combat 8 Wings of Thieves has a Strange Real Evolution Episode 1 trailer, which that's a mouthful to say the least. I don't know what that really means. The Blood Rain Definitive Collection is launching July 29th. It includes Blood Rain Revamped, Blood Rain 2 Revamped, and Blood Rain Betrayal Fresh Bites. So, and I think Fresh Bites in particular was a side game with a different animation style. This might very well be a case where the publisher just re-got the rights and made some remakes, or they're just rebundling and reselling the remakes to increase sales, physical sales. Still kind of crazy that they still exist. Way of the Hunter 2 adds a PS5 and Xbox Series version. The Famitsu sales from the 16th to the 22nd have been updated. Pokapia remains on top, while Crimson Desert opens at 31,108 retail sales, which probably means it's in the second spot for the PS5. Yep. So, two very different games, two very different consoles. Switch and Nintendo consoles not holding as much dominance as they have in the past, with Resident Evil Requiem also in the 6th spot for the PS5. But still overall dominating to a ridiculous level. It'll be interesting to see what next week's Famitsu sales numbers look like with a price hike on the PS5. Whether that's going to directly affect software sales, or if it is just going to affect hardware sales. I did not see anything in those announcements that implied the Japanese market was going to get a break. So I assume the PS5 is going up by $100 equivalents in yen in the area. Even if it doesn't, if gamers hear about the price hike, they may very well decide not to buy any more PS5 games for a while at least. Let's see, the side-scrolling shoot-'em-up ZPF launches on April 16th for the Xbox One and Series, and Switch and PC. Then Mullet Mad Jack is coming to the Switch on April 30th. It's currently already available for Xbox Series, Xbox One, and PC. Which, let's watch the trailer here. Still have not figured out how to get better back support. Like, since I have an adjustable recliner that helps the old people get out of the chair, to get the back support to the level I would want, I would have to have the entire chair hovering in its lift position. Yeah. There was G-Man Lives. That's a YouTube content creator that centers, I believe, pretty specifically around boomer shooter type games. Yep, I enjoy his expertise, I suppose is the right word to say there, in that he can speak very much towards his love for those types of games and his focus on those types of games without feeling the need to cover games that he's less interested in. So I definitely would say he's kind of a specialist, where I would describe myself as more of a generalist, jack of all trades, master of none type. It is interesting certainly to see quotes from G-Man Lives in the same trailer as things from Rock Paper Shotgun and other more mainstream video game journalists, which at a certain point maybe the split between mainstream and independent video game journalists is going to become paper thin, as there are no companies that are actually going to be funding video game journalists, and it really is just going to be a split between people with opinions you do agree with versus people with opinions you don't agree with, and they're all going to be on YouTube and mostly independent. Let's see, War of Visions, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius is going to end service on May 28th in Japan. I bet it's either never come out. Nope. Global version ends May 30th. So I've never heard of it, so I suspected it may have never even come to the West, but I guess it did. RPG Maker, a new project has been announced. Make HD 2D style RPGs. So, yep, weirdly RPG Maker, still using the name RPG Maker. And I guess the thought here is it's going to take the concept that Square Enix did with Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake and make it, again, probably too easy for your average low effort game developer to make something similar. Now, weirdly, though, I would say it's a awkward situation in that I don't think HD 2D remakes, even for the ones that have been made, are great. I think the concept is fairly flawed to start with. Yeah, there's just not something there that I find particularly appealing, and it feels like to me when you see these HD 2D remakes, you're just having 3D modelers put their 3D models in games that shouldn't have 3D models in them, because there are just fewer people who can 2D model something. Inherently, something created by the same artist would have the same visual style. I would have to assume, in most cases, that's true. And as such, you just are going to have better art when the same artist is doing the foreground and the background. When you create these kinds of budget cuts concepts like HD 2D, it really just screams that you're being cheap. The publisher's being cheap. Let's see. Cotton Rock with You launches August 6th in Japan. I would assume that this is a music game from the name, but the Cotton series overall has been more around the side-scrolling shooter style of game, I think. It is also interesting how you have fairly different visuals on the reversible covers, or possibly different regions. I think these are just reversible covers as far as the art goes, because it's just PS5 and PS5 and Switch 2 and Switch 2. Let's hit play and see if we can see the trailer. Yeah, unless I am sorely mistaken, Cotton is just flying magical people in a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up bullet hell type game. If I was going to do a series or play side-scrolling shoot-'em-up games in general, I think Cotton would be in the top 5 series to at least investigate. Yeah. There is a fairly unique fantasy element to the Cotton games, whereas a lot of side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups are just ships shooting at monsters or ships shooting at ships. Let's see. Good Smile Company and Front Wing announced a visual novel called Kokoro for PC. Isn't Kokoro a style of design? Yeah, it sounds like it's one of those rare, not used very often English words that a Japanese visual novel might use. Of course, Kokoro might sound very much like something said in Japanese, so it might be a Japanese word at some level. Yeah, there's a decent chance that this trailer is going to show us almost nothing. It will just be text on screen as far as who's the voice actors and who's the writers and things like that. Yep, they're showing us a bunch of empty backgrounds, but in a visual novel that means absolutely nothing. It could be that the scenes are empty and that there's nothing there, which would be kind of boring, or it could be that there's just a lot of characters they're not ready to reveal. Yeah. So yeah, it seems to me like anime girl in a biodome after some kind of post-apocalypse would be my guess as to what is going on. And it certainly is nice on these visual novels just how many people are getting mentioned, even if it is just for advertisement purposes. You've got the planning and scenario person, character designer, the super deformed artwork, I would assume, or yeah, and then the backgrounds, and then the music, and then the voice cast. Seems like this could be the entirety of the team working on a visual novel, which even that is a fairly large amount of people working on a visual novel, when honestly it could be 2 or 3 people working on one. But also that highlights where if you have a name that is notable working on each section, you do tend to have a higher chance of having something really good looking coming out as your product you're developing. Moving on to gaming on Linux. Let's see, we already talked about Alien Deathstorm, don't need to cover it again. Planetary Annihilation Titans gets revived as the devs ask for Linux help and feedback. That is interesting. Asking for feedback. I don't always see that happen. Or when people and companies are asking for feedback, they usually are not earnest in what they want to hear. Hytale Update 4 is another absolute whopper with over 500 new blocks. I suppose if Hytale came out of early access and it just had way more content than Minecraft, there might be something interesting there. That being said, there still probably will be enough differences to have Hytale not be a direct replacement for Minecraft. There are 7 new hairstyles, all feel like they are inspired by African hairstyles being added to the game, which is always something people talk about a lot, is African hairstyles on characters or on your custom character developer in the game. I imagine there's probably several other hairstyles that are being overlooked as far as things you could add into the game too. Like, certainly there are some weirder hairstyles, older hairstyles that you could throw in the game, but I doubt anybody would really care to use them in their character creator. And so yeah, the first step I suppose is just to have hairstyles that people actually have and diversify as much there before you have like ridiculous silly hairstyles that fell out of fashion 2,000 years ago or something like that. Moving on, Stalker 2 Cost of Hope expansion has been announced for the summer of 2026. We talked about that. Monado is going to become the first open source foundation for various open XR/VR vendors. Interesting. Monado. It's kind of crazy how slow XR, VR, and augmented reality have been adopted in general, and how slow they've been to work and collaborate with each other. Whereas the struggling of adoption and the high cost to use VR just feels like a thing that would have pushed them to work together a lot more than they did. Let's see, Grounded 2 has been Steam Deck verified with the latest updates. That might explain why a lot of people are playing it. Ubuntu 26.04 long-term support beta has been released with GNOME 50 and Linux kernel 7.0 and Mesa 26. So those are all very big number changes here. Inherently, the foundation of moving to Linux kernel 7.0 and having potentially code-breaking changes happen by changing up the major number, which almost certainly will happen with the kernel. Probably pushed them to make a GNOME 50 and probably pushed Mesa 26. So yeah, that's big changes are going to happen with a lot of distros. That being said, I really wouldn't support Ubuntu or select Ubuntu. I guess maybe if you didn't care about gaming and you just wanted something that you were already familiar with and you'd already used Ubuntu, you might stick with Ubuntu. But the snap packs issue around Ubuntu makes it its own weird thing, where Ubuntu is a little too much like a Mac OS compared to Linux being more like a Windows, where yeah, compatibility and how you do things in Ubuntu are going to just be lower, particularly I think as time goes forward. There's going to be less and less tutorials online of people doing things through Ubuntu. The story-driven action RPG The Expanse Osiris Reborn gets a new trailer. I don't think we actually watched the trailer, but I'm not going to watch it now. And then Serious Sam Shadowverse has been announced with a new co-op roguelike first-person shooter. The real-time strategy game Perimeter Leggett Edition gets Linux ARM 64 binaries and Steam Workshop support. Man. Okay. I am getting really uncomfortable in the chair at this point, and I'm really just leaning back way too much. Let me try and adjust myself. So AMD has announced the Ryzen 9 9950X 3D2 dual edition processor. This feels like this is just something that's going to be really expensive. It's apparently the first ever to come with dual AMD 3D V cache technology. So, I mean, at a certain level, this is just going to be like an $1,800 chip, I suspect, at current prices. Maybe a little bit cheaper than that. And then there are definitely going to be some performance issues to question as far as dual AMD 3D V cache. Does that really work? Does it have problems? Does it have problems on specific programs and games? Or does it just work without having any issues at all? And is this potentially the future where you have a potentially 8-core or 16-core, in this case, 16-core, 32 threads, I would suspect, processors. I assume they would all be performance cores, with none of them being efficiency cores. And yeah, I imagine the dual edition really is specifically talking about the 3D V cache, which we would benefit for more cache. So 208 megabytes of total cache gives them 5 to 10% performance gain over the Ryzen 9 9950X 3D. So yeah, this definitely is one of those products where you're going to be paying a lot more than 10% more to get 10% performance, which really only makes sense if you're working for Hollywood and every second of your time is worth hundreds upon hundreds of dollars, and 10% faster processing of CGI elements or something like that is potentially useful. They are mentioning the open source, I believe, DaVinci Resolve. No, I don't think DaVinci Resolve actually is open source. Blender is. But yeah, they are definitely talking about video editor DaVinci Resolve, which I think is the industry standard. Blender, and then large scale source code builds like Unreal Engine and Chromium for the few people who are making their own browser based off of Chromium. It's going to launch April 22nd. And yeah. Is there anything particularly new or interesting here? Max boost clock is 5.6 gigahertz. And see, this is where I'd like to see this go away, and I'd like to see CPUs just have a base clock speed of 4.3 gigahertz, which even that is still a lie, because it really is 500 or 600 megahertz times 16 threads or 16 cores to get up to 4.3 gigahertz. Like, we really, as far as clock speed in a computer, are not anywhere close to that, and they've been cheating the metrics to make it seem like the CPUs are getting faster and faster. There's also certainly a question here as to, is it guaranteed that the level 1 cache and the level 2 cache are locked in at where they're locked in? It looks like there's slightly more than a megabyte of level 1 cache and then there's exactly 16 megabytes of level 2 cache they're mentioning, and then they're throwing level 3 cache at 192 megabytes, which ideally level 1 cache would be the fastest, so you'd want all of it in level 1 cache, but that's not really how the system works, and I think standards have been set in stone, so adding more level 1 cache I just think has a decent chance of not working. I don't think any of the technologies here have really changed at all. It is worth pointing out that you very possibly will have to update your motherboard or buy a new motherboard. And then they're recommending liquid coolers, which I don't particularly like that. I don't like liquid cooling because there's always a high chance of leaks eventually happening. And yeah, 200 watts by default, always just coming out of your wall socket. But yeah, there's a new CPU coming out, which happens fairly frequently. Perhaps lends some normality to the world that even despite the economic situations right now, AMD is still trying to gouge people with new, overpriced, slightly improved CPUs. The cult classic RPG Off has added Linux and macOS support. I don't recognize this at all as a game, but whatever. A chaotic party battler where vacuum cleaners face off room battle is now available. A monster taming roguelike Aethermancer just got a big upgrade. Okay, I'm gonna really just burn through a lot of these. The cozy open world exploration crafting adventure Duck Side of the Moon arrives in May. Horizon Chase Turbo is getting delisted after the Epic Game layoffs. Originally developed by Aquaris, now known as Epic Games Brazil, the retro racer Horizon Chase Turbo is getting delisted from all storefronts. This follows on the news of the layoffs at Epic Games Store, where over 1,000 people have been affected. It is interesting how a game would be delisted after layoffs. Seems like somebody's spending extra effort to delist the game, perhaps even out of spite, because I would think Epic would just say, let's keep that going. But maybe they have some kind of contractual obligation if they keep it going to the people they laid off, so I don't know. It is Brazil, and Brazil definitely has some different kinds of laws and different way it protects its citizens, so might be reasons why they just want to pull out of Brazil completely. And it may very well be that the game cannot be transferred outside of Brazil. The rights to the game have to stay within that country. The Steam Client Beta brings fixes for the new Linux Steam RT3 beta. Which I don't know what the Steam RT3 beta is. The Steam RT3 beta is a new container system that the Steam client can run inside on Linux system, much the same as how games run inside the Steam Linux runtime. And it comes with 64-bit support finally too. It's a bit buggy right now, but Valve has already begun improving it. So yeah, they're expecting their Steam client to run in a new container and be more containerized like a Flatpak, I suppose, and just be more performant once it can support 64-bit. So I imagine though that doesn't really change whether a game itself is running 64-bit or not. It's just opening the doors to potentially making games run on 64-bit code in the future, in a distant future, I would suspect. Yeah, it may very well be the case that people will have to manually patch their games to run in 64-bit, and many games just won't really need to be run in 64-bit. It may very well be that the 64-bit container will allow 32-bit games to run fine, and then they will just drop support for whatever exists now that's running in 32-bit, because there definitely have been conversations. Nobody's really felt like it's the right time to stop having code that's 32-bit on Linux, but 10 years from now, almost certainly it will happen, and there will just be no code at all that is running in a 32-bit mode on CPUs. CPUs themselves may not have 32-bit modes, and they may be running all code in 64-bit function calls. I know in programming, on some low-level C code, you sometimes would have different function calls for do this as a 64-bit command versus do this as a 32-bit command. And a lot of times what would happen is you'd have the standard C library in C code, in C++ code, and the standard C library, as you updated it, might very well shift the API calls. It's not even API calls, it would be the assembly language, the machine code CPU calls, to being 64-bit, just in the background without a lot of coders even knowing it, which usually doesn't create a problem unless somebody wrote their code very badly. If I wrote a sample program with a 32-bit function call that was intentionally trying to do a overflow or roll over from all binary ones to all binary zeros again, if that didn't throw an error to start with, which it should, and the program actually worked that way in 32-bit, it wouldn't work in 64-bit, because rolling over 32 binary ones to in 64-bit would just be the 31st bit would become a 1, and everything else would roll over to a 0 just fine, and it would just increment it. You wouldn't be able to roll over a 64-bit call for a considerably longer amount of time if you were incrementing by 1 or something like that. Proton Experimental brings fixes for Crimson Desert, Steam Overlay with EA games, and Death Stranding 2. Still seems like the newest games, the most popular games, are the ones getting the attention. You can get 15 games for $15 via the Humble Bundle. I don't think I can justify buying any more video games for at least a month, and it does seem like the collection of these games are pretty random. Of course, we probably now are going to see all of these games on Steam. Split Arena Reloaded, very mixed reviewed overall, but people these days are happy with it. I think they did some significant changes there. Of course, it is an online PvP game. There's 852 people online, so not a completely empty environment. Splitgate devs tease new movement shooter for fans of Titanfall and Black Ops 3. Seems weird that they'd be teasing in a new game when they probably should be focusing more just on Splitgate Arena Reloaded for a while more. We have one from 2021 that's on the wish list. That's probably a Humble Bundle game. The GNOME Fellowship Program has been announced to support critical and under-resourced areas. People behind GNOME recently announced this fellowship program. Who are they going to be? Fellowships will generally last 12 months working in whatever areas they want instead of being specifically directed towards something. letting people know there's letting people who know their stuff just get on with it. For the first set of work, though, they're hoping to get people to work on the likes of build systems, CI/CD, infrastructure, testing frameworks, developer tooling, documentation, accessibility, and reducing technical debt. I assume CI/CD is critical infrastructure / critical data infrastructure, or critical information, critical data, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm really guessing there. So basically they're throwing money at people that they hope can fix some problems, reducing technical debt in particular. I question, though, while GNOME was definitely a default good choice to go with as far as desktop apps and how you design desktop apps, I think KDE, just because it's on the Steam Deck, has the real future there. Plus KDE has Wayland support that is more advanced than I think GNOME does, if GNOME has Wayland support at all. Yeah. Part of the problem with why Linux has not been easy to adopt in past years is the fact that you have these different distros that have different windowing systems, with GNOME being completely different window systems from KDE's desktop environment system. So there really should have been a stronger force making one standard that was used by all, just more cooperation overall. There probably should have been a lot more adults in the room, like cooling temper tantrums and getting people to work on the same side. And frankly, a lot more money would have helped too. So yeah, this is another Humble Bundle game, I'm sure. Forza Horizon 6 confirmed to be playable on the Steam Deck and SteamOS. That's good news. Lunark is another Humble Bundle game. Not that many of those actually opened up. And then Dropsy, I guess it's also in the bundle. I actually played that game, and yeah, it's just very, very weird game, and for a point-and-click adventure, you know, it just didn't really excite me much. I was hoping a lot more to get a lot more from it. I'm pretty sure I played it all the way through, but I definitely didn't like it. 21 hours played. Yeah. Did I not get any of the achievements in it? I don't even care. I wouldn't go back and play the game just to get achievements. Probably wouldn't go back to play it for any reason. That brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. This is, I'm guessing, another Humble Bundle game from 2023. Owlcat Games is using generative AI to iterate faster on The Expanse. Guess it's good to know. That probably means boycott the game if you're not happy about that. Let's see, Undead West. Yeah, I don't think it's really a game I'd want to play. Plus, it's not even that relevant. 29 user reviews from December 9th, 2024. Unity sunsetting the ads network and divesting the publishing label Supersonic. The company has claimed jettisoning both businesses will help drive revenue growth. I don't know how you can claim you're going to bring up revenue growth by getting rid of your ads network and publishing labels Supersonic, unless the argument is that Supersonic was acting as an anchor and actually costing them money. But yeah, I guess I really don't know Supersonic well enough to speak any further to it, but that definitely seems like this is just layoffs in another wrapping and another way to advertise layoffs as something different. It may be that its ads network and its mobile publishing label, Supersonic, only focused on mobile games, and maybe that was not worth it staying with. Here we have a game that is rated very positively, but I don't know if I'd really play it just based on the visuals. And there's some real problems with this thumbnail. First of all, you have a giant ad effectively saying you were in the top 10, not even the winner, just the top 10 of IndieDB's Indie of the Year of 2024. Then you have thick black outline frame to start with. Then you have green frame to start with. And yeah, it's just taking up a lot of the visuals and very distracting. Let's see, Sony confirmed PS5 hardware is about to become even more expensive. Yeah, and I doubt anything would really change there too. It's not going to be a case where, unless PlayStation pulled out of the market completely, and even then, if they did pull out of the market completely, PlayStation 5s would still be extremely expensive. You're not going to get a deal on a PS5 unless you get something broken that you maybe could fix, and you'd have to be quite the specialist to be able to fix a PS5. But yeah, years down the line, I imagine PS5s will still be expensive even when they move on to a PlayStation 6. That would be about the only time when the price might go down even a little bit, is when they announce a PS6 and people are no longer interested in buying PS5s. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Forza Horizon 6 is not out yet. Analyst says that the Epic Games layoff sends a clear message. This will not get any easier. The myth of perpetual growth continues to bulldoze through the industry. Yep. Okay. Check out this game developer article if you're interested. This is from 2022. Weird looking game. I don't remember it at all. The next Playground is also getting a price hike. This is the console that I was talking about, that if I was going to get a gaming console, I would get this, except for the fact that there is a subscription service around it too. So now this already overpriced at $250 Xbox Connect type console is going to be $300. I still will say that the next Playground is probably the best walk up and play, get people to play a game experience. But I mean, we are quickly approaching the expense of what VR used to cost for the next Playground, and it's really more of a kids game console than anything. Let's see, Ion Shift. It's from 2024 and rated very positively. I'll put that on the wish list, at least. Let's see, Nintendo tweaks the Switch 2 software pricing to make digital copies more appealing. This move will impact Nintendo published titles, starting with Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. Yeah. So, again, third-party publishers may very well not lower the price at all for the digital copies of their games. Fortnite, Rocket Racing, and more are being sunsetted amid layoffs. Plus, Horizon Chase and Horizon Chase Turbo will no longer be available to download starting in June. So yeah, there's a whole list of games. Also kind of games that really wouldn't benefit from getting them and trying to play them right now if they're just going to be delisted or they're not going to have a player base. And then Xbox and Netflix are kicking around ideas for subscription bundles, which, I mean, there's great arguments to both not have an Xbox or a Netflix bundle. So if the two became one, it's a slightly better offering, but not by much. Like, I imagine there would be a lot of infighting on who gets what cut for the bundle price, and the bundle price itself, I imagine, might be really high for what you're getting. And then there's really not a lot of synergy there either. It's not like Netflix is unique to an Xbox console that you can't watch Netflix on tons of other devices. And it's not like if you have a Netflix streaming service that you can play Xbox games streaming on like a smart TV. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't, but yeah, I don't think there's a lot of synergy there. It does seem like Xbox has updated their grid, and they've found a way to be, I guess, somewhat repetitive with it, but like Blueprints is a relatively new game in this grid, so I would say they have updated it a little bit, but honestly they may very well have only added Blueprints over some other game they don't want to promote anymore. We look at all the other games, maybe this Modern Warfare version is new, but yeah, the rest of these still look like rather old games. I'm being shown Deathloop, very old game at this point and not really relevant. Alright, so that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, and yeah, well, it's taken me a long time just to get to this point. So when I swipe down like this, which I have been doing for a while, that will close a tab. I don't know what just happened there. And then if I want to leave a tab, I'll swipe this way so I can pretend like I'm going to make it YouTube short on it. And then if I'm really interested in the game, I'll put it on the follow list and swipe it here. But that's how things are going to go in reality. I imagine I will close a lot of really garbage looking games, but today also I would say I am somewhat mentally drained, so my experience as far as what happens then is I give far too many games a shot and put them on the follow list, and then there is no good system I've set up yet to actually clear out the following list, so the following list is just getting bigger and bigger for the most part. And going back and investigating games that are on the following list is not something I've created a system to improve. So I've created a system to make a mess. I have not created a system to fix the mess. Yeah. And I imagine on this Friday we will just see maybe slightly more than average garbage games, but maybe even slightly more adult games, although it does seem like adult games not in the adult section are getting fewer and fewer. They may finally have gotten to the point where they're going to really crack down on people having games that should be in the adult section not in the adult section. And it's funny because you'll see games with like sexual content or hentai as a tag, and yet still it somehow allows them to not put that in the adult section, when you'd assume that those tags could only be used if something was in the adult section, or would immediately flag games for human review. And you'd think that they'd actually look at the games before they put them on the Steam storefront. Yes, the average developer will almost certainly agree that Steam has a discovery problem, and people who put games on Steam in particular have a discovery problem. But at a certain level, I would say Steam needs to fix its curation problem, and curation is probably not the right word you want to use. Consistency might be a better word to use. Or certification might be the best term. That when a Steam Direct person puts a game on Steam, it actually is being looked at by humans and certified and allowed on the storefront in the first place, before it just automatically shows up on the storefront. Like, obviously we assume these games are getting scanned for viruses, but even in that case we've had several virus or malicious type applications on Steam, and there have been many stories of just adult games that I've personally seen that are not in the adult section, and just massive amounts of games that come out that are extremely low quality, which I wouldn't say all of these games are low quality, but yeah, when you see something like this, that screams to me that there probably isn't a lot in this game, and I would maybe not eliminate that games in particular, but I would consider eliminating that game. Here's an interesting turn of events. We have 58% positivity around the Marvel Maximum collection. I wonder if this isn't just that the emulators perform terribly. X-Men Arcade Online is insanely laggy. Rollback netcode, no. Captain America and Avenger Arcade, my character starts walking backward automatically. Maximum Carnage Mega Drive version is missing the ability to shoot a web straight up, which makes it sometimes impossible to get. Also, after beating the game, the achievement did not unlock. So yeah, there's just terrible emulation and online code, which there really shouldn't be the case. Let's look at limited run games just for a moment here and see if that's an overall problem. I'm not sure. We'll look at Jurassic Park, we'll look at Gex, look at this one, and then we'll look at this one since that one's new. That's 4 games. Yeah, Fear Effect only has 12 users, and it's been out a month. Fear Effect 2. It's 100% positive, but it's not very relevant. Toomba has 244 reviewers, giving it 90% positivity. So I can put that on the wish list. Gex is mostly positive as far as the Gex trilogy. I don't know why that wouldn't have been on the follow list. And then Jurassic Park is teetering, but overall I would say the mostly positive with 139 user reviews outweighs the 15 user reviews that are giving it 60% in the last 30 days. So that does seem to me like maybe the X-Men game in particular is the only one that tried to do online, or something really went wrong there. But that certainly wasn't what I was expecting to happen. I was expecting the game to come out and not have any options for online play, and for it to just be emulated and run well. This almost feels like a game that I'd be interested in playing, but Yeah, the visuals feel too AI generated. Yeah. Just don't think that there's a thing there. Yeah. We have a visual novel that feels like it's also AI generated. But apparently not. Then I guess I would just say I don't like the art style. A man is transformed into a woman by a vengeful witch and realizes she likes it better this way. I don't know how transgendered people would really feel about that. Is that if you're forced to transition and then you realize you like it? I mean, that to me feels like the danger there is then the same argument could be made in the opposite direction, where if you were forced to detransition, you may find you like it, and that's not a message that I think transgendered people would agree with or want to hear. And certainly there have been historical stories of not a witch transforming somebody, but of women, girls, being forced to act like men to hide their gender. And yeah, genital mutilation is definitely an aspect there too. Yeah, and not just women, there have also been plenty of stories of boys too. So yeah, the idea of being forced, I think, is a red flag there. Here we have another live action. It looks like it might be a Thai visual novel. We're just starting to see more and more of these, which I suspect it's almost certainly a one-for-one trade-off that any developer or publisher that was doing anime visual novel type things have decided now to potentially, it's quite a variety of things being published there, like come out under a different brand and make live action things. How far back? I saw that one. Alright. That one. Yeah, this is mostly negative already. And that is potentially a danger of censorship, is that the entire style of games might get replaced with even a very different style that might be even lazier, might not be. Let's see, this is some kind of Chinese game. And then AI to make the script, animations, and UI elements. Yeah. Yeah, the visuals are all over the place. I'm gonna definitely say no to that. Apparently this one's not supported in my language, which I don't know how hard that would really be to support the language. Do you want to play this? Not really. Get back into the mode of closing a bunch of these tabs and being done. Give that a chance. Yeah. If only there was fewer things to go through, fewer news stories, or fewer games coming out. I'm gonna give this a chance even though it doesn't really look like anything. Yeah. I fairly often do give thoughts to like maybe breaking up these live streams and airing something shorter every day, but yeah, that really doesn't work with my schedule. It doesn't make a lot of sense to just try and commit every weekday. Here we have a Yuri visual novel that doesn't claim AI use. I'm going to put this on the follow list. Vampire Bride. Guns and Swords. Don't think I'm going to make an actual YouTube short on it though, because yeah, I've never really seen a lot of reception to the visual novels on YouTube shorts, but honestly I've stopped putting up the YouTube shorts for months now, so I didn't do it long enough to get a great idea of its level of success. This game Peeping feels like it might be AI. Yep. And that is probably the path we're going to go down, is we're going to start to... I'm probably going to just start closing everything that's AI. That's a very easy line to draw in the sand. And just say, hey, we're only going to highlight and talk about games that either put out a secondary press release or have AI, no AI stuff in it. Let's see, again, this feels like this is AI. Yep. And I personally don't really care about what level of AI or how they describe they use the AI, if they use AI at all. At the moment, I want to just not highlight those games. In a funny way, that might solve the discoverability issue. In a nutshell, as if half of all games are not being shown, that solves my problem. It doesn't really change anything, I think, for most gamers. This is a garbage game. Yep. And I probably am not too far away from being done. I'm going to give this a chance. It's probably nothing. But yeah. I would like to run a poll. I know I wouldn't really get any responses, but I would be very interested to try and figure out how many people of the age in which they're deciding their own lint and what they give up for lint actually give up video games for lint. And how many parents or other parental units force kids to give up games for lint. Lint being, I think, pretty uniquely Catholic. There's going to be a lot of people that don't give up anything for Lent. But yeah, it would be interesting to know if there is some small drop in a player base of a game or of games in general due to Lent. I bet there probably isn't. But yeah. Scrolling down the fall list here, pretending like I might look at some of the games and then not looking at any of the games. Alright, well, I was able to kind of rush through, so that didn't turn into a 4-hour complete stream. That's going to be it for the stream though. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.